Learn how to use React Hook Form, which makes it simple to add forms to React with authentication. In this course from CodeGenix, you'll learn how to handle the most complex CRUD form scenarios in React and completely integrate it with Zod and Material UI.
This is the most complete zero to hero tutorial you can find for free on YouTube for React Hook Form. I spent a large amount of time on this tutorial, so liking and subscribing means the world to me. In this tutorial, you will learn how to handle the most complex CRUD form scenarios and completely integrate it with Zod and Material UI or MUI. If you only want to learn React Hook Form and not Zod or MUI, or if you want to change your validation library, for example to YAP, or UI library, for example to AndDesign, you can still follow along with the tutorial. The video is mostly about React Hook Form. The tutorial is project-based, but you will learn concepts section by section, so you can navigate through the video to the section you want using the timeline below. We are going to create a user CRUD form that covers the most possible form scenarios. As you can see here, our user is going to have a name, email address, the states, languages, gender, skills, registration date and time, former employment period, which is a date range, his salary range, and also dynamic form fields like this. As you can see here, I can add new form fields to my form dynamically. Each field is going to have its unique validation. For example, for email, if I put wrong input, this throws this validation error that email is not valid. And if I make it a valid email like this, for example, test@gmail.com, their error will be gone. Or for example, if I select more than 2 skills for my user, the error will be raised, which I have put in my validation schema like this. For each of these fields, we create reusable components that connect the MUI component to the React Hook form. You can later use these components in your other React projects. All of this is handled in the most type-safe way with the least amount of code. You can also find all of the codes in the description below of this video. You will also learn how to populate your form fields by calling external API like this. For example, if I switch between different users here, you can see the form fields will be filled according to the data that I'm getting from the server. And for example, if I change the James name to the, for example, David here, and if I go down and hit on edit user, you see that user edited successfully and the James changed to David. And if I again switch to this user here, you see that the new data is populated in the user's form. So you will learn how to create, read, and update an entity with a real-world example using the best form validation strategy, best practices, architecture, and much, much more. So let's get started. Before we start setting up the project, I need you to know that you can find all of the links of the source codes in the description below. Also, if you have already set up your project, you can always change the timeline below and head over to the section that you want. Another thing that I want you to know is that more than 92% of my viewers are not subscribed to my channel. So subscribing and liking this video can really help me to stay motivated, and it helps me grow my YouTube channel sooner. So thank you very much. So let's start the tutorial. Open up your preferred IDE. In this tutorial, I'm going to use VS Code. Then open up your terminal and create a very simple Vite application like this. npm create Vite and dot to create the project in the same folder and hit enter. I'm going to select React here, TypeScript plus SWC for better performance. And that's it. Then let me just clear my terminal here. Then type npm install to install all the packages. After that, all of the packages have installed. We need to also install all of the requirements for our project. These are all of the packages and dependencies that we need to install for our tutorial. First, we have MUI packages here. These 3 are always required in every MUI project. This is for our icons, our date pickers here. For this tutorial being complete, we need to also install the date pickers pro version of MUI, but if you don't have this installed or if you don't have the license, you can also follow the tutorial 100%. There's nothing different if you don't have it installed, because you can install it easily. And after that, if you have preferred to use the extra features of date pickers, which are not a lot, but you can buy the license pro of it to use it. But in this tutorial, the simple date pickers will satisfy our needs. There's only 1 or 2 features that we need to have the Date Pickers Pro installed, but there's nothing very special. You can follow along. We're also going to use the DataFNS. There are many libraries for managing date and time in JavaScript, but for example, Moments and DataFNS, but the reason that I prefer DataFNS over all of the similar packages is that it supports many different calendars and you can always convert between all those calendars between each other, which is pretty awesome. After that, we have our form logic here. The main dependency, the React hook form is here. We use Zod for our schemas and validations. We also need to create a connection between the React hook form and the Zod here. And because of that, we need to install these hook form resolvers because by default, the React hook form doesn't know anything about Zod, so we need to create a connection between these 2 libraries with this third library, which we are going to install it as a dev dependency. And lastly, we have our utils here. We need a simple HTTP client. We are going to use Axios here because we are going to fetch our data outside of our project for simulating the real world. We are going to use a mock backend in this tutorial, which we are going to set it up later. After that, we are going to install the Lodash for a very simple task, which is not very required in this tutorial. And also we are going to install the React query to manage our server state, which is not required in this tutorial. And if you have other ways to handle your queries, you can follow along. And it's just for the simplicity that it provides. And if you want to learn it, you can check the description below to check my other free video on YouTube about React query, which is the complete course of this package. But you can still follow along if you don't want to use this package or you haven't learned it yet. Now we head over to the VS Code, then open up the terminal and install all of the dependencies that I just told you about. But a very important thing to do here is that to just install the version 3.2 of the DateFNS library here, because there's some conflicts between this library here and the MUI Date Pickers library. So if you install this version of it, everything is gonna be all right. Now hit enter. After that they are installed, you need to also install a very simple dependency, the hook form dev tools as a dev dependency here, which is helpful for debugging our form. So hit enter also. Then if we head over to our package.json file, let me just make it a little bit smaller. These are all of the versions that I'm using in this project. So if you want to exactly follow along, you can install these exact versions so you don't have any conflicts or other problems. Also, I'm using the Node version 20 in this tutorial. Now close your package.json file, open your file explorer here, then delete the assets folder, app.css and index.css file here because I always want to keep everything very simple. And in this tutorial, we are not going to use any CSS at all and styling because we don't need them. So remove all of these, then head over to your app.tsx file, then remove all of these imports, then remove everything between the curly braces here till the bottom. And for simplicity, I'm going to return a simple div like this. We're going to change it later. And I will prefer the named export instead of default exports. It's just a personal preference, so use whatever you want. Now I need to do a little bit folder structure here. In the src folder, I'm going to create a components folder, a types folder, and also a users folder, which is mainly the thing that we are going to develop in this tutorial is in this folder. As we talked before, and I'll show you, we are going to create a CRUD user form in this tutorial. Also in this feature, in the users feature, I again create the components folder, the services folder, the types folder, and also the utils folder to do some simple tasks for us. In the components folder, I'm going to create the users.tsx component itself, itself, which is the main component of this feature. Then the services folder is for communicating to the outside world. For that, I'm going to create one file called queries.ts, because if you have followed along my React query or Tanstack query tutorial, you know what is this going to be. But if you don't know it, or if you don't know React query, you can also follow along pretty easily. And also we need to create another file called mutations.ts. This is responsible for example, our post requests, delete requests, put requests. And this is for only getting data from the server, which is not related to this tutorial, but I have to do because it makes the project much simpler for you to follow along. Let me just collapse these, and we don't need to create anything inside these two folders for now. Then we need to head over to the main.tsx file. Let me just close the Explorer here. I need to remove these two imports here. Sorry, I need to just remove the index.css file here and change this import to named import like this. Now we need to wrap our project inside our React query like this. I'm going to simply create a new query client. Client is equal to new query client. I don't know why sometimes my VS Code IntelliSense for imports does not work, so I'm going to import all of the packages manually. So I'm going to import from Tanstack React query the query client itself, and also I need to import query client provider here like this, and I'm going to wrap my project inside this provider here. So like this, I'm going to use query client provider, and I'm going to wrap my app file inside it. Then for the property, client property, I'm going to use this query client that we just defined earlier. So like this, query client. Then I need to go to the user's component here. Then I'm going to export a very simple function component like this, return div, for example, users. And after that, I'm going to import the user component inside our app.tsx file here like this. I'm going to remove this return. Again, I'm going to type return, and then I'm going to use users here like this. And now if we run our application like this, npm run dev, if you head over to this address here, we see that everything is working as expected. Excuse me that if the tutorial is very slow paced, but I want you go through everything in detail, and this tutorial is very beginner friendly, so anyone can follow. Now that project is perfectly set up, we can start the main project. So for that, we head over to our users.tsx file. And for you to better understand the concept of React hook form, the controllers, and Zod, I need you to create the old way of creating form fields in React, which is pretty simple, just follow along, but it's necessary for you to learn the React hook form and the controllers of React hook form. So it's necessary to follow along. In the return of our component, I need to create a simple HTML input. As you can see here, the input is here, but it doesn't have any special functionality for now. For this input to have some meaning, I need to create a simple state like this. For example, input and set input. I'm going to import from React the user state, and the initial value is a simple string. Now I need to somehow create a connection between this and this input. For that, for the value property of my input field, I'm going to put, for example, the input. And now, for example, if I change the initial value of this input, for example, to something, and if I refresh the page, you see that this value is binded here. Just let me remove it. And as you can see, if I type anything here, you see that nothing is changing because I need to also do something when the input is changing. So for that, I'm going to use the onClick handler for React. Then I'm going to get the event from this. And after that, I'm going to set the input to it.target.value. Sorry for my mistake. Instead of onClick, I need to use onChange handler. And now if I type something on this input, you see that the value changes. And now I can access this value inside of my component because this value is exactly this. For other things to handle, for example, I need to specify the unblur. When the user leaves the field, what should happen? I need to specify a name for my input. For example, the user name by hand. command. Then I need to pass the ref. I need to handle the disabled state. If the field is required, what is the max length of my input field, and much more. As you can see, this is too much code for only a very simple text field or input in our project, and it's going to be spaghetti code as our project grows, which is not very developer friendly, and it's going to become very hard to maintain for enterprise or larger scale applications. And that's the old way of using or creating form fields in React. Now I need to replace this implementation with the modern React hook form implementation. Let me just remove all of this. Only I need to keep the input like this. Then I'm going to remove the state and also the user set import. Then from the React hook form, I need to import the main hook of this amazing library like this. Then inside my component here, I'm going to use it. I'm going to define const is equal to use form like this. And from our use form hook, I can access all of the properties of the React hook form. For example, I can get the values of my form. I can register my fields. I can reset my form. I can set value of any fields and much more. You can also use the functions or values of use form hook like this. For example, instead of opening and closing curly braces here, I can remove it, and for example, I can say form, and below it, for example, I can access all those properties and attributes like this. For example, I can say form.register, or I can say form.setValue, but it's too much boilerplate code and hard to read. And also the use form recommends us to initialize the values from use form hook like this. For example, for now, I need to get the register for now, and you're going to know what is it in a second. Also, this hook here is generic. What does it mean? It means that I can pass a type for my form like this. For example, my form is a single email input like this, which is of type string here. This is going to help us with IntelliSense very much. You're going to know in a second. Inside the return section, I'm going to open and close curly braces here, and I'm going to use a spread operator. Then I'm going to put the register here like this. So, and for its value, I'm going to place single quotations here. And as you can see here, the IntelliSense is helping me here. This is the email the React hook form got from the generic that we passed here. So the IntelliSense is very crucial here. So I select email here, and as you can see, my input field is registered with my hook form. But what is this register here? Let me just remind you. Instead of passing unchange, ref, name, the unblur, max length of our field, is it required or not, and so much more. Instead of this, we're going to pass this, which if I show you register, and if I place a dot here, you can see all of the things that is going to do for us with this spread operator here. It has name, unblur, unchange, ref, required, disabled, max, min, and so much more. Let me just remove all of these. This is the most simple form that you can create with React hook form. And if you compare it with previous implementation, you can see that it's so much cleaner code and easy to maintain, and it does for us very much. Now, if you open your browser, you can see that everything is working as previously. Just let me put a simple placeholder for my input for you to know that it's an email field. And now you see that there is no validation on this input field. For example, I don't want to let the user enter invalid email. For example, this is not a valid email, so I need to show the user a very simple error below it that your email is not valid, or it is too many characters, or this field is required and, for example, you cannot leave it alone. The thing that I'm going to show you is the default implementation of field validation in React hook form, but it's for you to better understand the concept of React hook form, and it's not the way that we want to implement the validation in our tutorial, and for that we are going to use Zod in a few minutes. Imagine that my email field in my form is required and it cannot have more than 10 characters. To make this type of validation, I'm going to put a comma here. Then I'm going to open an object here. Inside that, for example, I can type required. These are all native HTML fields validation. And I again open another curly braces here. And for the value, I can say I can put the true here because my email field is required. And for the message, I'm going to put, for example, the email is required. I can add other validations here. For example, I can add max length is going to be 10, for example. And for the message, I'm going to put too many characters. Characters. That's it for now. But how to show these errors to the users? I need to put my input inside a React fragment here. And below the input, I'm going to open a paragraph here. Then I can show the errors to the user. But how? Very simple. In the use form hook, we have our form state like this. And if I show you this form state here, form state, you can see that there is errors here, disable the fields that are dirty, or for example, if our form is submitting and much more. But it's not a good practice to use, for example, if I want to show the user the errors like this, form state.errors, it's too much code and it's not very nice. For that, in my use form hook, I'm going to put colon, then from it, I'm going to import the errors or other thing that you want. For now, the errors is enough. Between these two paragraphs here, I can put errors.email. This is for the generic that we pass here in our use form hook, and the IntelliSense is amazingly helping us out. And we put another dot here. I can get the email.message here. Then we can show it to the user. And now if I head over to my application, and if I, for example, put more than 10 characters here, as you can see, there is no error shown to the user. But what is the problem here? By default, the React hook form shows the user the fields errors, the form errors, when the user hit on submit or create or anything else button below the form. But for now, we don't have any submit button inside our form. For that, inside the options of the use form hook, I can open an object here, and I can also apply many default settings for my use form here. I can set, for example, default values for my form. I can set initial errors. I can use the resolver, which is the thing that is going to connect the Zod to the React hook form in a moment. For now, I need only the mode field here. Then I put colon here. And as you can see here, this is when form validation occurs. By default, it's on submit by default. And if I again refresh the page, and if I type more than 10 characters, you can see that there is no error here because it waits for us to submit the form, then show the errors to the user. But if I put it on all, and if I refresh the page, you can see if I type more than 10 characters, it immediately shows me this error because the validation is set on all. I can also change it to many other conditions. For example, I can put it on blur here. And if I refresh the page, if I type more than 10 characters and unfocus from this input, you can see that on blur, this error is going to be shown to us. But for this tutorial, I'm going to put it on all for you to see better all the errors and when they occur. And to your preference, you can change it later. For example, if I type something, then remove it, you see that the email is required. Let me just make it a little bit smaller. The email is required is shown to us from here, which is very powerful thing to do in use form with a few lines of code, which is handled for us automatically. Every form needs to be able to submit its data to something. For example, your backend. It's pretty simple in React hook form. I'm going to change this React fragment here, for example, to form. Then this form has a property called onSubmit. This is all HTML. And inside it, I need to pass something. First, what I'm going to do on submit, if the user clicks on submit button, or if he clicks on the enter button on his keyboard, it's going to run this function here. For example, I can name it whatever I want. For example, I call it on submit for simplicity. Then I'm going to create a simple function that likes the submit word here. And I can pass the on submit here. The problem is that whenever the user clicks on submit or hits enter on his keyboard, the form is going to be submitted to the server, which is not the behavior that we want because there might be some fields that they are not validated or they are required but they are not filled by the user. So we do not want that behavior. To overcome that, also React Hook Form provides us with another utility called handle submit for us. It's pretty easy to use it. You just need to wrap your submit function here around it. Handle submit, and I put on submit here inside. What does this do is that, let me just show you side by side. If I go over it and hit on enter, which submits our form and runs this function here, if I hit enter, you see that it's going to raise us all the form fields errors. And also, if you check the console here, if I refresh again and hit on enter, this function didn't run, which is exactly the behavior that we want. We want this onSubmit function to only run when all fields are valid. This handle submit does this for us. So if I make this email form valid, for example, like this, and if I hit on enter, you see that submit is run correctly. Now, if I make this form not valid, and if I hit on enter, you see that there is no submit here, which is exactly the behavior that we want. So this was the most simple form that you can create using React Hook Form. This way of implementing a form in React Hook Form is totally alright and 100% correct. But the problem is that when our forms become more complex, this way of handling for schemas here and the validations like this here is not very maintainable, and it can become unmaintainable after a while. Imagine that your application has 15, 20 or 30 forms inside it, and each of them has 20 or 30 fields in it, and you need to handle all of the validations, the schema, the submit, and so much more. This way of implementing is not recommended for enterprise applications in React. The Zod is here to rescue us. In this tutorial, we're going to create this form here. As you can see, there is so much into it. If I, for example, click on the submit, the new user button, you see that all of the validations are causing error, which is correct. If I hit the reset button here, the form has been reset. If I click on, for example, David, a user, the fields are loaded. If I click on John, Robert, and so much more. I have Autocomplete here, the toggle button. And for example, these checkboxes have validation too. For example, if I select more than 2 items, the validation is causing this error that at most 2 elements must be selected, which all of these errors, and for example, all of these errors are caused by Zod. For example, if I put no email here, it says that email is required. If I put invalid email, it says that email is not valid, and so much more. And if you want to handle these type of forms with this way, it's not pretty recommended. So we need to use Zod. This is Zod. Zod is a TypeScript first schema validation with static type inference, which is pretty complicated here and in the documentation also. Zod is a TypeScript first schema declaration and validation library and so much more. But we are going to learn what is it in real world example for you to learn better in practice. This is the form that we have created so far, and this is the form that we are going to create. Before we start anything about implementing this structure in our project, we need to create a skeleton for our form. By skeleton, I mean the schema for our form. The fields names, their types, their validations. For example, this field is going to be of type string. This is going to be of type Boolean. This is going to be of type date. These are going to be of type string arrays, and much, much more. During the schema creation, I'm going to compare the result and the schema itself side by side for you to better understand what are we doing and creating at the moment. So in your VS Code, just open the File Explorer, then inside the users folder. Inside the types, I'm going to create the schema.ts file, which is the schema for the user's form, which is, this schema is exactly going to be here when it has been implemented. So now if I head over to the schema, I need to start implementing my form schema. To create a schema in Zod, first we need to import Z from Zod. And inside my schema.ts file here, I'm going to export const schema. You can name it whatever you want, which is going to be equal to z.object. And inside it, I'm going to put all of my form fields. What do I mean? As you can see here, my form has a name field. Then inside my schema, for example, I can put the name field here, which is going to be of type z.string. And that's it for our first field schema with Zod. The syntax is very explanatory and very, very easy to implement. For example, if I had another field called, for example, age, I can do something like z.number. If I had a date field, for example, I can do z.date. We can do, for example, custom field with Zod like this. Imagine that you have a type that is not in Zod's default types, and you can define it here, and so much more that we are going to learn them one by one. Let me just remove the age also. Also, if you remember, you see that my name field is a required field. And if I remove and clear the field, you see that it says that a string must contain at least one character. To implement something like this in Zod, which is pretty simple, I can put another dot here, min and 1. It means that the field cannot be less than 1. At least I need to put one character for error to be gone. Also, this error that is shown here is handled by Zod also, and you can also override this default error. Pretty simple. In your schema right here, for example, I can open an object here, put message here, then I can put something like required here. And you're going to see this required exactly here in the error field, which we haven't implemented our form yet, so bear with me. The other field is email, which the concepts are the same, but the problem is that we cannot put the Zod doesn't have anything like the email validation here, and we must put this kind of validation manually, which is pretty simple and normal. Below the name here, I'm going to create the email, which, as I told you before, the names here can be different and can be anything. In front of email, I'm going to put z.string as before, and then I'm going to put min of 1, which means that the field is required. And also, if the email is not filled yet, the validation error caused this error to be raised. Email is required. Let me just make it a little bit smaller. It's too much. And that's it for now. But it only validates if the email is not filled or if this input is empty, like this. But how can I do something like this? If the user enters invalid email, where does this come from? This is the power of Zod here. I can put .refine here. Then what does this do is that it's going to create different or custom validation for our fields. After all of this here, by now my email is going to be a type of string with a minimum character of 1. And now I have access to the email input like this. For example, email, but it can be item, the text, anything else. The name doesn't matter here, but the thing you need to know is that this is going to be exactly the thing that the user has typed now. For example, if I put A here, it's going to be A. If I type FA here, the email, or for example, item or text field is going to be FA. Now I need to do something here in the refine function of Zod. I need to validate the text to be email. And if it is true, then the validation is correct. And else, if it is not a valid email, it causes this error to be raised. So it's pretty simple to do. Let me just remove this here. Inside your file explorer, I need to create, for example, a new file called constants.ts here. Then I'm going to paste this custom regex here, which will validate any email pattern here. You can copy it from the source code, or you can do any other different regex pattern that you want. Just I only want to show you how we can implement different types of custom validations in Zod. So we define this patterns.email here. If I want to access it from other components, I can access it like this, patterns.email, which is JavaScript 101. Now, if I head over to the user's component here, the schema function here, I can do something like this. This refine function expects us to return a Boolean statement. It must be either true or false. So I need to validate if this text the text that the user has filled by now is an email or not. It's pretty simple using regex. So I'm going to return patterns dot email. This is exactly the thing that we just pasted here. Then I'm going to test this regex with the value of this. Now this is going to return a true false statement. If this text validates the email regex that we just pasted, it's going to return true. Otherwise it's going to return false, and then our form field is going to show us an error. And also I can make this code a little bit simpler. I remove this curly brace here, this one, and also this one. Then I'm going to return the return here, and that's so much simpler. After the function, we can pass another argument here, which I can pass custom validation errors like this. For example, I can say email not valid, which you are going to see it in our application in a moment. We are going to do the next fields in a moment. Just I need to implement these two fields schemas inside my users component for you to see what are we doing by now. Now we need to start implementing our form fields one by one in our users component here using Material UI or MUI. And I expect you to know a little bit of Material UI because our usage of Material UI or MUI in this tutorial is not pretty complex, and it's very easy to follow. If you don't know anything about MUI, you can also follow along. The usage of MUI in this tutorial is something like, for example, this input field here, and in the MUI world, this input field is going to be, for example, be text field instead of input. So I remove all of this. I just put a simple React fragment here. I'm going to remove this also. I need only the register here. Then I need to remove this generic here, but I need the mode to be all for now. Then I'm going to remove this on submit also. Now I can start adding my MUI components here. If we head over to our schema here again, we see that we defined a name and an email here. So I need to create two text fields using MUI. The first one, I'm going to import text field, which my instance is not working. I'm going to import text field from @MUI and material. Then I'm going to pass a register as before, but as you can see here, I cannot see any IntelliSense at all. It is because that we remove the generic that we passed here. So I need to pass something here. This is our schema and this is our form here. We need to create some kind of connection between this schema here and this generic here, because I expect that here I can see the name or email by VS Code Intelligence. For example, name or email here, which is recommended to me by VS Code. But now I cannot see anything because this form here doesn't know anything about this schema here. To do that, I cannot simply pass this schema here, because this isn't a type, but this generic here accepts only types. The Zod has an amazing utility type that you can easily convert your schema into types. Like this. Below my schema or anywhere else, I can export a type called, for example, a schema or anything else, which is going to be equal to z.infer. And I'm going to pass this schema as a generic to this z.infer here. I'm going to pass the type of our schema. And now, if you hover over the schema, you see that we have name and email, and we converted our schema here to a type, which now I can simply put this schema in here. A schema, and I'm going to import it from types schema. And if we control and space here, we see that we have email and name pretty easily, and the IntelliSense is working as we expected. But by now, our form doesn't know anything about the Zod here. We only pass the name. This is used only for IntelliSense and nothing much more, but we need to somehow create a connection between the form, the React hook form, and Zod, which is pretty simple here. Inside this object here, I can pass the resolver like this. And for resolver, I'm going to use Zod resolver. Then I need to import the Zod resolver from hook form, the resolvers /Zod. Then this Zod resolver here expects us to provide it with an argument, which this argument is going to be exactly exactly the schema that we just defined earlier. So I'm going to put schema here, and that's it. By now, our form is completely connected to the schema here by using the Zod resolver for the logic and the schema generic that we have inferred from Zod for the IntelliSense to work better. Now, I have IntelliSense for my name field, and also I'm going to put another field for my email. But as you can see by now, they don't have any labels. I'm going to add a label for name, for example, called name, and also another for email called email for you to see better understand what is what. Then I'm going to put them in a simple stack. If you don't know what a stack is in MUI, it's a display flex with a direction of column. And now I can add a gap of 2 between these two fields here. The 6 is exactly equivalent to the style prop on any HTML tag. For example, instead of doing this in MUI, I'm going to do something like, for example, div style display is of type flex direction is column, and also the gap is going to be 2, which is exactly this stack here, but we do not need it. The stack is pretty much simpler because we are using MUI. Now, everything is correct now, but as you can see here, if I do anything, the validations that we define in our schema, these validations, the schema, the email is required, email is not valid, or the required message of our name field are not shown to us because we need to tell the MUI about these errors, which is pretty simple and self-explanatory. The MUI Text Field provides us with an error. Boolean, what is it? If it's true, the field is going to be of type of color red, and else is going to be normal. So we need to somehow tell the MUI that if there is an error on this field, change your color to red or error or whatever else. To do that, as before, from the form state object, I'm going to get the errors of my form. And for the error, I want to make it true when we have an error, otherwise false. Errors.email. But we need to convert this value to a boolean. It's pretty simple in TypeScript. We are going to use double exclamation marks here, and this is going to convert this value to a boolean. And now, sorry, I use wrong field here. I'm going to put name here instead of email because it's email, it's a name field. And now if I don't fill it, you see that we have an error because the field is required and we haven't filled it yet. And if I again fill it, we see that the error is gone. But we need to also show the user the error. The MUI provides us with the helper text prop. If you want to use it, we can simply put helper text here in our text field. Then inside it, we can provide, for example, I can provide it here test. As you can see here, the helper text is exactly below our text field here. And for example, if our form field has an error, the error is going to be here. And we somehow need to substitute this text here with the error validation that we provided in the Zod schema. If you head over to our schema here, then I put it here side by side. We need to somehow show the user the validation errors in our schema in our component. So it's very simple, can be done with the React hook form. On our errors object, errors.email, not email, the name.message, I can get the validation message from our schema. As you can see here, this error message is automatically provided by the Zod. We can override it here like this. I can put, for example, message is equal to required. And now if I refresh my page, then we can see the validation here. This required exactly here. And if I resolve this issue here, you can see that error is gone. I can simply do this scenario also for the email text field. For error, I can pass the errors.email exactly like the name text field. And also for the error message, I can do exactly something that we done for the name. errors.email.message. And if I enter invalid email, we can see that this error message here exactly is shown to the user. If I make this field empty, we can see that email is required, which is exactly this message that we have passed for our email in our schema. This is enough for now. So let's just add new fields to our schema. So I close the users component here, make this bigger. And if I head over to our final project here, we can see that here we have an autocomplete component from MUI, which we can select the states in the dropdown here. And also I added another validation that if we select more than 2 items here, it will cause this error to be raised. In comparison to text fields, implementing this autocomplete component and connecting it with React hook form and Zod is something that we need to handle it manually. Let me just give you an example. If I head over to my users component, I create for you the most simplest form of autocomplete here. The complete, I'm going to import it from MUI. Then it's going to need an options property, which is responsible for showing these options here. For example, for demonstrating only, I'm going to, for example, put the ID to 1. And for the value, I'm going to use, for example, Texas here. Also, we need to put the render input prop here. We're going to get the params from this render input. Then for the return of it, I'm going to render a simple text field like this. I'm going to pass the params here with the label of, for example, something like states. If you head over to the MUI documentation of autocomplete, this is exactly the implementation that we just did in our users component here. Now, if I head over to my application, we see that an error will be raised because instead of value, I forgot to put label instead, because autocomplete needs an array of options with the key ID and key label here instead of value. And if I click on my autocomplete here, I can see that the text is here. This is the implementation of an autocomplete component in MUI. But the problem is that this component doesn't know anything about our form here. And we cannot do something simply like our text field here. We cannot pass something as simply as a register to this autocomplete, and we cannot expect that it works. So let me just remove it from here. Because of that, I need to create a custom controller for the MUI autocomplete component, and I want to make it reusable so we can use this component that we just created anywhere that we want. Because of that, I'm gonna open the file explorer here. Then in the components inside the src folder, I'm going to put the custom controllers that we create for the React hook form and MUI. So inside this folder, I'm going to create a custom component, for example, called RHF autocomplete.tsx. The RHF stands for React hook form. So I always want to create my custom controllers like this, so I know that it's a controller for the React hook form library. Inside this component, I'm going to export function RHF autocomplete like this. Then I'm going to return a simple something here for now. Implementing this controller here, the component that we are just going to create here, is pretty much tricky, but very sensible, and it requires to follow along the instructions carefully. And if we implement this custom controller in our project, the rest of the tutorial will be very easy. We are going to create custom controllers for autocomplete, for toggle group, for radio buttons, for checkboxes, and much more. Let me just remove the return value here. Then I'm going to return controller, and I'm going to import it from React hook form. Let me just make the ID full screen to concentrate. Then I'm going to close it here. This controller from React hook form provides us a render property that from this we can get the params that the React hook form provides us. Then we can pass it to something that we want this controller to control. For example, here I'm going to use the autocomplete component from MUI, and we need to fill in the value here, the onChange method, options, and much more. But we need to somehow get all of these values from our controller here. Our controller also wants a property called control, which I'm going to pass the control here, which I did not define it yet, and also a name here. After that, we implemented this custom component, which we didn't yet. If I head over to my users, I cannot simply use it, for example, like this, RHF autocomplete in my users component. Then I'm going to pass the name, for example, something, which is exactly something like this register here. I'm going to pass the options, which, for example, in this example, let me just change it to state. In this example, is going to be our list of states here. And also, for example, a label to show the user what is this field stand for. For example, I'll put the state label here like this. But what should be put for this control and name here? This control here is exactly going to be the control that we get from our useForm hook. We need to somehow pass this control to our RHF Autocomplete component here. Also, we need to pass the name, the errors, the error message, and much more related to our form here, which is not a good practice to pass all of these values from our form to our child component, because we want to make this component reusable everywhere that we want, but we cannot pass from our parent form to our child component in here, RHF Autocomplete, every time that we want to use. For example, in here, if we want to use the RHF Autocomplete in this component here, I need to pass 5 or 6 at least properties from our parent to this component here, which is not very good practice. The React hook form provides us with a very powerful API called useFormContext. What does it mean? It means that I can define a form here, use form, then inside another child component of this parent component, I can use, instead of using useForm here, I can use useFormContext. As you can see, our nested input, this component is wrapped around this form provider. This is all related to React context, and if you don't know about the React context, you must learn it for this tutorial to make sense for you. So if you don't know it, I recommend you to just put 10 or 15 minutes of your time to learn it. And after you have learned it, then come back to this tutorial, then we can do the rest of the tutorial. If I want to recap, this nested component here is wrapped around this form provider or form context here. And I can simply access the register of this useForm hook here exactly inside my child component. Other than register, I can access control, errors, and much more. Anything that we have in our form. Instead of passing all of our form properties to this nested input here, we can simply use useFormContext here, which is gonna be very helpful for much complex components and will make it easier for us to handle these complex scenarios, and it will solve for us the problem of passing all of these properties into our child component. So the first thing that we need to do is to wrap our user's component inside a form provider here. To do that, I just remove this component here for now. Then inside the file explorer, I'm going to create another file called, for example, usersprovider.tsx. Inside it, I'm going to export function usersProvider. Then inside it, I'm going to return a form provider, which is going to be imported from the React hook form. Then inside it, I'm going to put my users component, exactly this component here, for our context to be recognized from this users component here. As you can see in the React hook form documentation, we need to also pass these methods that we have got it from the use form for our form provider. Very simple. Inside it, I'm going to initialize my form, exactly the thing that we have here. I'm gonna cut all of it here. Then I'm going to head over to the users provider. Then I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to import this use form here, the schema of our form that we just defined it here, also the schema itself, and I need to import again the Zod resolver like this from hook forms, resolvers, and Zod. We do not need this. We just need to initialize the use form properties like this. I'm going to put methods here, and then I'm going to pass the methods like this for our form provider here. The other thing that we need to do is that we need to head over to the app.tsx file, and instead of directly using the users component here, which is wrong, we need to use the users provider instead of users. So I'm going to delete this, and instead of this, I'm going to use users provider here. Now that our provider is set up, inside our users, instead of using the use form, we can simply use use form context here. This use form context is exactly the users provider here, this form. And then we can also use this use form context in our, for example, RHF Autocomplete here, which is going to be a child of this users component here like this. I need to get the register from it exactly how we do it with use form hook, and also the form state errors. But the problem is that the TypeScript is throwing us this error that it cannot access the name or email because it doesn't recognize our schema here, because we need to pass, as before, our generic here. I'm going to pass our schema that we just defined earlier. Then the errors are gone. Now we need to head over to our RHF Autocomplete component. For the control, I'm going to simply get it from our useForm context. Control is equal to useForm context here, as simply as this. But this component is not aware of what this name can be. So I need to pass it from my parent component, the users component here. So if I define my RHF autocomplete here, I need a property, for example, like this, that I can simply pass the states here. So if I head over to the autocomplete component, we need to use the power of generics in TypeScript, which if you don't know anything about generics in TypeScript, I recommend you to learn it, then come back to this tutorial because it's outside the scope of this tutorial, but you can also follow along if you don't know anything about it. But if you know it, it would help you a lot. Inside my RHF autocomplete, I need to get the props from my parent component. I'm going to define the interface for type props, which is going to be equal to name a string. And I'm going to get this name here. As you can see here, the error is gone, but it's not complete yet. Because if we head over to our users, we see that if I remove this states here, the IntelliSense of TypeScript is not helping me out because the TypeScript does not know anything about this schema here and what it contains to help me out with the items that I can put here. Before we go any further with our autocomplete component, let me just head over to our schema file here and create the states field schema here like this. If you recall, our states is an autocomplete here that it can hold multiple value, or in other words, it's an array of strings that it cannot hold more than 2 items, and it's also required. So what does it mean? It means that it's an array of a string which is required, and also it has a maximum capacity of 2 items at most. Then open your users component, and by now we expect that TypeScript helps us with the states name here, but as you can see, the TypeScript is not helping us at all. So we need the help of TypeScript here. If I head over to my custom RHF autocomplete component here, I need to do something with this string here. Simply putting a string for the type of this name here is not correct because the TypeScript won't help us with this IntelliSense here. The thing that we are going to do is that TypeScript knows that we can put states here. So inside our autocomplete component, instead of a string, I need to pass something else. The thing that we need to pass here instead of this is path, which is going to be imported from React Hook form, which is a type. And also we need to provide something to it, which I call it T. We need to get this T from our parent. How? You can see generics as inputs of your type. For example, if I give you an example, for example, I have function test here, which is going to have parameters, for example, test, which is of type a string here. As you can see here, we can pass values to our function like this. We open and close the parentheses here and pass our values here. But for type, we can simply use the syntax. For example, my type, instead of round parentheses, I can use this type of parentheses, bigger than less than signs, and we can simply pass our type here. Let me just remove it. And for our props, I need to pass the T, which is going to extend the field values from the React Hook form. All of these are necessary for creating custom controllers for our project. So bear with me. Now, also this props is throwing us this error that it needs a generic parameter that we need to pass to it. I need to pass the T. It again is throwing us this error that couldn't find name T. So we need to also get it from our parents like this. T also extends field values like this exactly. And then we can simply pass the name here. The thing that we just did is pretty amazing. If I head over to my users component, by now, again, the TypeScript doesn't know anything about the thing that must be filled here. But if we pass our form schema here, we see that the IntelliSense is working amazingly. This schema that we just passed here is going to be this T here, and then the TypeScript is intelligent enough to know that this name can hold the values of our schema, email, name, states, so far. I put states here for now. We handled the complex section of the tutorial, the generics here, but we have done something amazing here. Now, our custom component has IntelliSense for the name property. So what about our autocomplete itself. The first thing that our autocomplete wants is the options property. Options is going to be the thing that we are going to get from our parents here, because as I told you before, our custom controller here doesn't know anything about our parents, so we must pass all of these properties from our parent to this component. So below this name here, I'm going to define options here, which is going to be of type option, which I didn't define it yet. So head over to your file explorer, then inside our types folder, create a very simple type called option.ts, which is going to be export type option here. It's equal to ID, which is of type string, and label, which is also a type of string. Then close this component here, close this, then import it here. Again, my IntelliSense is not working. Import option from types here, and option. Then I need to get it from my props interface, options here. Then the error here is gone. Also, we need to handle value, unchange, render, input, and so much more one by one. For the value and unchange, as we talked before, we need to let the React hook form to take care of it. These params here inside the render property of our controller, we can destruct it here like this. From it, I can get the field here, and inside the field, I can get value, unchange, and the ref here for now. Inside it, for the value, I'm going to pass the value, which is here, which is going to hold the selected options in this value. What do I mean is that if I, for example, select California here, this value by now is an array of options, which the option is ID of 1 and the label of California. If I select Texas, for example, the ID is going to be, let me just show you like this. The value is going to be, for example, by now is ID 1 and the label is California for this one. And for the second one is going to be ID, for example, 2 and the label is going to be Texas here. So I need to create a connection between this value that hookform provides us with this autocomplete property value here. And then I'm going to need to map over them. Let me just remove it. And for each iteration, this value is going to return ID here. If you recall the schema of our states here, we see that it's an array of strings. In here, the value, I want it to be also an array of IDs, an array of strings. So in each iteration over value here, I will get ID here, which is of type string. Then I need to make a comparison between this ID and my options here. How to? It's pretty simple. We just remove these parentheses here. Over the options, I'm going to find which item.id is equal to this ID. What does this do is that it converts this value here, which is going to be this. For example, 1 and 2, these are the IDs of selected items, and we'll convert them to, for example, ID of 1, label California, and the ID of 2 with the label of, for example, Texas. So by now, we mapped the value here to the autocomplete data here, which is exactly that we want. For the unchange method of this autocomplete here, unchange, the MUI unchange property on autocomplete provides us with two parameters here. The first one that we don't want it, and the second value is the new value of our changing item. If I open the callback here, inside it, I'm going to pass this unchange here that we get it from our controller here. So I'm going to pass unchange here. The new value that the MUI provides us, I can pass it here, new value. Then I'm going to map over these values. If I show you what this new value holds, it's something like this, ID 1 with the label of California and much more. Then we need to convert it to this data here, 1, 2. We need to somehow convert this to this, exactly the opposite, the thing that we just did for the value here. So inside this, I'm going to map over each new value. Then for each of them, I'm going to return item.id. For now, the IntelliSense is not smart enough to know what the type of this item is, but in a few moments later, we're going to solve this issue also. The problem is that our autocomplete is single select, but we need to somehow tell the TypeScript, tell the MUI that I want a multiple select autocomplete, like this one here. I can select multiple items here, but by default, the autocomplete of MUI is single select, and it's because of that we cannot map over the new value because it's a single item, not an array. To overcome this, we simply put the multiple boolean here, and by now our error is gone, and now our new value is an array that we can map over them and get the IDs of them. This get option label here that I just put it a little bit sooner. Let me just create it for you. Get option label is used to get the label of each ID with our options here. So if I recall it, by now our autocomplete holds the value like this. This is the value that our autocomplete provides us by now. So by this here, I need to get the label of these corresponding labels. For example, if we recall, one is California and two is Texas. To get the label for each of these IDs, I need to simply pass another callback function like this. For example, I'll call it option here. Then I'm going to map over the options here, the options that we pass from our parent to our child. Then I'm going to find. Then for each item, I'm going to check if the item.id is equal to option.id here. And if you found anything, I'm going to put .label here. Otherwise, if it didn't find anything, I'm going to simply pass an empty string here. So this line exactly is going to convert this to this. For example, California and Texas. If you don't do it, it will throw us an error and it won't show the corresponding labels of the IDs correctly. So it's also required. The other thing that we need to add is that we need to tell our autocomplete component that which option is equal to which value, like this. If I select this, it knows that this option is selected and it must highlight it and check the checkbox here. To implement this, I can simply use another property of the MUI library here. I don't know why I pasted them earlier, but as you know, the is option equal to value is responsible to map between our options and the values of our autocomplete. You can do other miscellaneous things for the autocomplete. For example, I don't want my autocomplete to be closed when the new item is selected, so I'm going to disable close on select. By now, we have passed the most things that we want, but we forgot to put the render input here, which is required by the autocomplete MUI component. This render input provides us with the params. Then inside it, I'm going to return a very simple text field. And this text field, first, we need to destruct these params here. Then I'm gonna make it full width. I need to pass a simple input ref. So the MUI will connect this text field here to the autocomplete here by passing this ref that we get it from the React hook form controller. So I'm going to need to pass the ref here. For the error, I simply need to get the error from the controller here. So after this object, the field object, I can get the form state. Sorry, instead of form state, I need to get the field state. I need a single error only. Error here, and then I'm going to pass it here like this as before. For the error message, for my autocomplete, I simply put error.message here. And for the label of my autocomplete, I'm going to get it from the parent, which is a simple string here, label string. I'm going to get it and then pass it here. The last thing to do, I need to make these checkboxes here to make it more beautiful and user-friendly. It's not something very special, but it can help the user, or maybe it's something that most of you want. Exactly below the render input here, I'm going to render option here. This option provides us with props option and the selected item here. Then I use the arrow function here and I'm going to return a simple JXS here. Box, which is of type list item. You can simply not pass it here. It's recommended, but don't do it for this tutorial. Then I'm going to destruct the props here. Then inside this box, I'm going to render a simple checkbox from Material UI. For the icon of it, I'm going to pass this icon here, and I simply pass it here. And for the checked icon, I'm going to pass this icon here. This icon, I'm going to copy it, then paste it in here. And to tell the MUI checkbox here that whether this checkbox is checked or not, to switch between these two icons, I can simply put checked property here and give the selected value, this value to it. Inside this box, I'm going to render the option.label here. The TypeScript is throwing us this error. We can simply, I did a mistake, I removed the component li here, and now the TypeScript error is gone. That's it. That's for the most complex controller that we are going to create in this tutorial. It was so much into it, but I promise you it's the most intelligent way to handle this custom controller for our autocomplete here. So it was pretty complex. We use generics here. We did something with MUI. We got value, options, unchanged. We did something with the autocomplete itself. We rendered custom input here, and also we added checkboxes to each list item of our autocomplete. Now close this component, the RHF autocomplete. Then inside our users, we have passed the states before. We need to pass the label. I'm going to call it states or whatever. And for the options, for now, I simply hardcode the values. The ID is going to be 1 and the label is going to be, for example, California. And another option, for example, 2, the label is going to be off top Texas. For now, it's enough. Now, if we head over to our application here, we see that we have so many errors. The most important one is can't access property map, value is undefined. If you head over to our autocomplete component, it's exactly this part, value.map. When we start at first render, we don't have any value here. This value is gonna be undefined. But instead, we expect that it holds an empty array instead of undefined. So this error will be gone. But I do not recommend using the optional operator here, the undefined operator here. So what we can do is that if you head over to our schema here, below it, I always recommend create a constant called default values, and you're gonna know what is it in a second. This default values is going to be of type the schema here. A schema is going to be equal to email. What is the most basic email that a user can provide is an empty string. Also for name, we have empty string and states, which is going to be an empty array because we have defined it in the schema that it's going to be an array of strings. And the most basic variation of it is empty array. For name, we have empty string, and for email, we have also empty string. Now, if you head over to our users provider here, which we defined our form here, below the resolver, we can pass the default values to the default values that we just defined in our schema here. But for simplicity, I remove this here, and now it's the same. It's always recommended to always pass the default values to your form initialization because the errors will be handled perfectly. It's better for performance. And now the use form can distinguish between the empty form, which we defined it in our default values, and the current form value. So it's always recommended to pass default values to your form initialization. And now you see that errors are gone. Our autocomplete is working perfectly here, and everything is correct and synced with the React hook form. If I refresh the page, you see that we do not have any errors in the console here, which is perfect. And that's it for our autocomplete here. But how to know that what values does our form house by now? There's a simple tool called DevTools for React Hook form. We installed it earlier, and I can import it like this. Import DevTool from hook form DevTools. And we need to pass a simple prop to it, control, which we are going to get from this and pass it to the DevTools. Methods.control here. As you can see here, on the top right corner of our project, we see that this icon is added here. If I now click on it, let me just make it a little bit bigger. If I click on it, and if I type something on name, and if I open it, we see that this value is exactly the same like this. If I, for example, enter something for my email, we see that the value is exactly here. We see the validation here, exactly in here. And also, we now see that our state autocomplete is empty by now. And if I select something here and open it again, we see that it holds the ID of 1, which is California. And if I also select Texas here, you see that the 2 is added here. It's not pretty powerful tool, but it can help you in some situations. Another way to see and log the current state and values of your form is a simple trick. We just need to simply go ahead to your user's component here. Then after we initialize our form context here, we need to use this simple code snippet here. I'm going to use the use effect by React, then put the empty for dependency array for now. And as a callback, I'm going to create a simple subscription here is equal to watch. But what is this watch here? We simply get this watch from our use form context or use form. It doesn't matter. The React hook form provides us with this really powerful hook here called watch. What does this do is that it returns the current state of my form like this. And if I like this value here or use it anywhere, I can see the current state of my form as an object. But another powerful thing to see here is that we can specify what field do we need to see. For example, if I put name here, always I see the current state of name field here, or I can use the states here, or I can use another watch here. For example, imagine that you have a component and you need to show the email that user has entered another place like this. If I copy this line here, then I head over here, I can simply use this value like this here. And whenever the user changes the email field here, this value will be updated and user can see the current state of email field. But as a developers of React hook form, they don't recommend us to always use watch here because we have another alternatives that we are going to learn them. It's a bottleneck for performance, and in some situations it can cause extra re-renders, but you need to use it carefully. This usage here is completely safe. For the callback of watch hook, I can pass the value here. Then as a function, I'm going to log the console.log the value that this hook returns us. Then after the use effect is done, I'm going to return the sub.unsubscribe here for memory management and performance best practices. And as dependency array, I'm going to put also watch here. And now if I open the console of my browser here and type something in any field, you can see on each keystroke or each state changes, the whole state of my form is logged here. For example, if I type something in the email field, you see that email field is something, and this can be very helpful in some situations, this way of logging the current state of your form. By now, we have learned so many new things about React hook form, Zod, and implementing them with Material UI. But if I again open the user's component here and head over the autocomplete here that we just created, we see that this scenario that we passed the current value or current options of this autocomplete is not applicable in real-world scenarios, and in 99% of scenarios, these values are going to be fetched from the server. And for the sake of this tutorial to be complete, we need to also get these values from the server here, but we need to create a very simple server on another port of our system to simulate a mock backend for our project. If you check the description below, you see that there's also another repo called Backend React Hook Form MUI Zod that you can simply clone it on your system. This is nothing very special. It has only two simple dependency, JSON server and cross origin here. We have an index.js file here that is going to provide us with this db.json file here. Let me just make it a little bit smaller here. As you can see here, this JSON file contains the states, the languages, the genders, the skills, users, and so much more. This is kind of a backend server that provides us with the simple CRUD operations in our project. And if you take a look at the outcome of this tutorial, you see that all of these values are going to be fetched from the server. The skills here are exactly the skills here that you see in the db.json file of our mock backend here, and many other fields. For example, if I click on Robert here, we see that the user with the name of Robert is going to be fetched from the server, and we are going to implement them in our project. To run the server, we simply, let me just stop the server, clear the terminal here. To just use this server, you need to clone it from the description below and type npm run start here. As you can see, the port is going to be exposed on the port of 88. You can access this backend API endpoints on your localhost point 8080. If now we we head over to our project, I need to simply use those API endpoints that we just saw earlier and use that in our application. For that, I need to go to the services folder and queries script here that we just defined it earlier. And by now it's completely empty. The goal here is to load these options here from the server. It's pretty simple. You just need to open the queries file here. Then inside it, I'm going to export a simple hook called, for example, use states here, which is going to return a use query hook. As a result, I'm simply going to use TinyStack query here for the sake of this tutorial. If you haven't learned it yet, please check my other video that I thoroughly explain this amazing library. And in modern React development, it's a must to put this library in use if you want to develop enterprise level applications. And it's pretty simple to use, but if you don't want to know this library and if you haven't already learned it yet, it's not a big deal and you can simply follow along the tutorial. Just imagine that this use states is going to return the states from the server, and you can get the states from our backend server with any way that you want. Simply here, I'm going to use the React query here. For the query key, I'm going to pass the states here. Then for the query function, I'm going to pass a very simple function that will resolve to the state of my backend server. How to get them is pretty simple by using the Axios library. Let me just import it. My IntelliSense doesn't work. Import Axios from Axios here. Then I'm going to .get something from this address, HTTP localhost 8080/states, which is going to return the states on the backend. And because we are using TypeScript, I'm going to specify the return of this query here, which is going to be option, an array of option that we defined earlier in the types folder here. You see that we defined option as an object of ID and label. And if we head over to our db.json file here on the backend, we see that our state is an array of ID and label. And we know that our backend is going to return this array of objects here, but I need to import it manually like this. Import option from types.option here. As you can see, I forgot to put a wrong. I use a const here wrong. I need to put the function here. And you see the errors are gone by now. Now, if I head over to the user's component, simply, I can use the hook that I just created here, for example, at the top of my component here, as simply as this. Const states query is equal to use states hook that we just created, use states. To use this here, I'm going to head over down, and as the options array, I'm going to simply pass the states query dot data. As you can see here, the TypeScript is throwing us this error that this states query.data might be undefined, which is correct. And we need to handle this situation also. So I head over to the controller for Autocomplete that we just created before and put this optional operator here. And we need to also resolve these problems that just occurred here. The options cannot be null on the Autocomplete component of Material UI. So I need to put the empty array if options is undefined. Also, I need to put the optional operator here and also here for errors to be gone. But I forgot to put something else in my query function. Let me just head over to the queries component. After that, the query is resolved. I need to then, as my response here, I need to get the res.data here. And now you see that errors are gone. And now you see that the new states are going to be fetched from the server. The validations are working correctly. And that's it for now. Also, I just implement the other queries that we need in our application. Here, they're pretty simple. I copy all the user states hook here, then paste it here. For other query, I'm going to put the use languages here. For the query function, I'm going to pass languages. And for the endpoint, I'm going to put languages here. Another hook, we need the genders that we need to get them from the server. Genders here. Put the genders for the query key and also get them by the genders endpoint. The last one is a skills query here. Use a skills here, put a skills here, and also get them from the skills endpoint for now. And I can use all of these 4 hooks in my application like this. The next controller that we are going to create is a simple toggle button group that is much simpler than this autocomplete that we just implemented earlier. So we need to create something like this. The values are going to be fetched from the server, and the current state of this field is always going to be present on the form state. So let's create our new controller in our application. In your src components folder, create another file called rhf toggle button group.tsx here, then export a simple function. Let me just close the file explorer, export function rhf toggle button group here, and simply return something for now as a return of this function. Like our autocomplete that we just created earlier, let me just put them side by side. I simply need to copy all of these props from the autocomplete, then paste it here, because from this point of tutorial to the end, most of the concepts are the same, with a little bit of tweaks in some places. Let me just close this here. We here only need the options and name, do not need the label because our toggle button group doesn't contain any label at any point. Then import the missing dependencies here. I'm going to import this from React hook form, also this, and import it up manually from types/option. Then I'm going to use the props type here, props, and get the values from the props, but I need to pass the generic here as before, the t extends field values. Then I can use the name and options value inside my component. This is very similar to the RHF autocomplete component. I'm going to simply get the control hook from my use form context, then pass the T here for type safety for now. Then I'm going to use the controller from React hook form, pass the control here, control as before, also pass the name and return this render function here, return something which is going to be the toggle button group that we are going to import it from Material UI for now. And from the callback pass parameters, I'm going to get the field. From fields, I'm going to get the onChange method, the value, and also the rest of the fields, rest field. Inside the props of the toggle button group here, I'm going to use the onChange method on this Material UI component here, then connected it with the React hook form controller and my form context here. The first argument, we don't need it here. I'm going to get the second argument and call it as new value. Then I'm going to do something here. For example, if the new value dot length is bigger than 0, I'm going to pass the onChange, this onChange with the new value, because this component is going to always return us with an array of strings. So we know that our new value is always going to be an array, which if it has any length or any item in it, I'm going to call this onChange method on the React hook form. For the value, I pass if value.length was bigger than 0, I'm going to return the value itself. Otherwise, I'm going to return the options. If it's present, then the first element of it, because the button group that we are going to create is exclusive and always one element is selected. If you don't want this behavior and you want your toggle button group at some point be completely empty and user can unselect all of them, you can modify this section. For the render, for the children of this toggle button group, I'm going to map over the options. Let me just refactor code. Dot map over the options. We get the option on each iteration. Then for each iteration, I'm going to simply render a toggle button instead of toggle button group. And inside the toggle button, for the text of it, I'm going to render the option.label here. For the value of the toggle button, I'm going to return option.id, and for the key also I'm going to return option.id here. We forgot to use this rest field here, so simply pass them here. To use this custom controller in our project, simply head over to the users component like this. Below the autocomplete, just put the RHF toggle button group and pass the schema as a generic here, and pass the field that we want, that we just need to define it in our schema. Just head over to the types and schema here, and below the states just put the languages spoken, which is going to be an array of strings. also put the languages spoken default array here for initial value. And in our users component, just pass the languages spoken as the name of it. And for the options, simply put empty array here, then go to the top of your file, initialize the languages, const languages query is equal to use languages. This is the hook that we just created earlier. And I simply need to use this for the options of my toggle button group here. So languages query dot data here. Perfect. If you now head over to your application here, if I, for example, click on Germany, you see that the ID 1 and 2 are selected. If I click on Spanish and check the console, you see that the current state, the languages spoken are 1, 2, and 3. And in real-world application, you can send these IDs to your backend server, which is pretty common. After this, we are going to create this radio group here, which is pretty simple and straightforward. Just head over to your SRC components folder and create a new component called RHF Radio Group here .tsx, and just head over to your RHF toggle button group here and copy all of this file here, then paste it in your RHF Radio Group component here, because a part of all of these controllers are the same. For example, the prop sections, for example, our radio group, we're going to have a title. So we are going to have a label field as a string. We need to change this name to RHF Radio Group here. The generics are the same. Also, we need to get this label from the props here. Label, the control is the same. The controllers are the same. We just need to remove all of these because we only need all of the fields the same that they are. Also, I need to get the field state, the error from the field state, and you're going to see why. Remove all the things inside the render function here. One way to handle this radio group controller in our application is to use the radio group itself from the Material UI and pass the props to it, but this way of using it is not, in my opinion, very recommended because you don't have control over the error state of your Material UI component. Your form doesn't have any label by now, and it's not very accessible for the users. To do that, to overcome that, I just need to simply first put the form control from Material UI here. Inside it, I'm going to put form label here, and inside it, I'm going to pass the label here. And below this label and inside this form control, I simply pass the radio group here like this. This way of creating these types of custom components is pretty common in Material UI world because because we have wrapped our radio button group inside a form control. It has a form control label. It automatically does so many things for us. For example, if there is an error as a prop for this form control here, for example, the form label will become red and so much more. And it's pretty readable for other developers too. Inside your radio group here, just map over the options.map, and in each iteration, we're also going to get the option itself. And inside the render of each iteration, I'm going to pass the form control label here like this. That's it. For the key, I'm going to pass the option.id. For the value, I'm going to pass the option.id. For the control itself, I'm going to pass the a simple radio from the Material UI. For the checked state, I'm going to pass the if field dot value is equal to option.id. I'm going to explain it in a second. And also for the label of each radio buttons, I'm going to pass the option.label here. So this value is the current state of each radio buttons. This control is the thing that this form control label is going to render for us. As you can see, it's pretty readable and accessible for the users, this way of handling these types of custom components. For the control of this form control label, I'm going to pass a simple radio. I'm going to pass the check property as if the field.value, here, the field that we are going to get from our controller, .value is equal to option.id. And if this statement is true, then our radio button is going to be checked. Also, I need to pass the field like this here. And also there is another error property on the form control here that I can pass. If there is an error in my form state, I'm going to put all of these in error state. Now, if I head over to my users component here below the RHF toggle button group, I'm going to pass the RHF radio group as before, we pass the schema generic here. We pass the name as a gender, but we don't have the gender on our schema here. So I'm going to head over to our types schema here. And for the gender, I'm simply going to pass the gender z.string, which is a simple string, but it's required. So the value that this gender field will be holding is, for example, something like this, the ID of the gender that we're going to get from server, or 2 or 3. And if there is no value, the Zod will throw us an error that this field is required. Let me just remove these redundant comments here. And for the default values, I simply pass the empty array here, empty string here. And also we need to pass the options here and also the label, which I'm going to call it the gender here. And for this options property here, I simply go to the top of my component and get the const genders query, which is equal to use genders like this. And if I put over down here, instead of this empty array, I simply pass genders query.data. As you can see here, we have this beautiful radio group here. If I open my console here, and if I select the male here, you see that our gender is 1. And if I again hit on the female button, you see that the state of gender becomes 2. But where does this 2 come from? If we head over to our backend here, we see that in our genders array, the male is 1 and the female is 2. And if I change it, for example, to male again, we see that the gender is 1. So that's it for our radio group. The next component that we are going to implement is this checkbox group here. After that, we also will create controllers for date and time pickers, date range pickers, range pickers, also the complex field array scenarios here that you can add new custom fields to your dynamic field, and each of these fields are going to have their unique validation. So let's implement this. Again, head over to your components folder here, create a new file called RHF. No, don't do it. Just copy, for example, your radio group again here, change the name to RHF checkbox like this. The generics are, the props and generics are the same. Just change the name to RHF checkbox here. This line is the same. The control, the name are the same. Just I need to change this object instruction here. I'm going to get the value and unchanged method from the field itself and nothing else. And also I'm going to get the error from the field state object here. We do not need to pass the field here, just the error itself. The label is as before. And instead of this radio group, I'm going to remove it and pass the form group from the Material UI, open it, and inside it map over the options.map. For each option, I'm going to render a simple checkbox. Form control label here, close it as solo tag here. For the control of this Material UI component, just pass the control like this. The control is also the same as our radio group. Is going to render, it is going to be, what will it be rendered for each iteration of our options. For each iteration, I'm going to render a simple checkbox here like this. For the key, I'm going to pass the option.id here. For the label, for the checked property, checked. I just realized that I did a mistake. I accidentally imported the checkbox icon from Material UI, not the checkbox itself. So let me import it like this, checkbox from the MUI material like this, and change this b into the lowercase b here. For the checked property here, I want to specify it when value.includes option.id here. For the unchange here, I simply pass this function here to handle the unchange of my checkbox group. If value.includes the option.id, then I'm going to call this unchange here inside this if statement, unchange value.filter, and in each iteration I'm going to simply get the item itself, which is going to be the ID of the checkbox that is selected. For example, if I select this item is going to be this. If I select this, it's also the same. So I'm going to get the item in each iteration, then check this statement here like this, option.id. Simply I'm telling the React hook form that only return the values that are not equal to the item, which is going to be the selected IDs by the user. But the TypeScript is throwing us this error that you cannot guess the type of this item here. So I simply do this trick here. I'm going to cast the value as an array of strings here. And as you can see, the error is gone now. And for the else clause of this if statement, I simply pass the on change to destruct the values themselves and also the current option.id here. Also for the label of my form group, I simply pass the option.label here. Let me just zoom out a little bit. That's our simple controller here for our checkbox group. Then we need to use this checkbox controller in our application. So I head over to the user's component here. Just head over to the top of your file here and get the skills query like this. Skills query is equal to use skills here. Then below here, just put RHF checkbox. Pass the schema here as before, pass the name as skills. Just head over to your schema here as before, define the skills field like this, z.array. Each array item is going to be a string. And for the maximum selected skills, for example, I want the user to only select not more than 2 items. For the skills default value, pass the empty array. Also pass the options from the query itself, skills.data here. And for the label, simply pass the skills name. And as you can see here, but I realized that I forgot to put the key for each form control label. Simply pass the option.id. And now if I head over to my application here, you see if I select each of these skills, the corresponding fields in my form state will be selected. And if I deselect any of them, you see that the skills array is empty. But as you can see here, if I select more than 2 items for the skills field like this, we see that the user has selected more than 2 items. And as we defined it in our schema here, we want to raise an error, but we also need to show the user the error itself. So I will head over to the checkbox component here. And below this form group here, I simply pass the form helper text here. And inside it, I simply pass the error.message here. And as you can see here, if I select more than 2 items, it says that array must contain at most 2 elements. But as we told before, you can also simply change the message, for example, to test here. If I refresh it and select more than 2 items instead of that default error message, this error will be going to show. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to return it and keep everything much simpler. And that's it for our checkbox component. The beautiful thing about this current stack, the MUI, Zod, and React hook form, is that it's very much simple to handle date pickers, time pickers, date time pickers, and also date range pickers. With a few lines of code, we can achieve a pretty powerful custom controller for each of these elements here. So let's get started. Now head over to your user's types schema here. And for example, create a new field called registration, date, and time for the name of my field, which is going to be a simple date here. And also for the default value, registration, I'm going to simply return the current date of the user system. Now just simply again head over to your components and create a new file called RHF date and time picker. But remove this and here for shorter name, and I remove to put the .tsx file here. And just head over to your toggle button here and select all of these and paste it in your date time picker here, because most of them are the same. These properties are the same, and I just need to change the name to RHF date time picker. Controller is the same. Remove all of these redundant custom imports here. Remove anything inside this render function here. And for the material UI component, date picker component, and anything else related to date pickers, we need to simply pass our localization provider, which are going to import it manually. Remove these redundant imports here. Import localization provider from MUI X date pickers. That's it, like this. But the best practice is to wrap all of your projects inside this localization provider in your, for example, main.tsx file here. At this level, I can pass the localization provider here, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to do that. Inside the localization provider, I simply import the date time picker from the xdate pickers from material UI library, like this. And for the label, I simply pass the label here, but I realize realize that this options is redundant here, and instead of option, I need simply pass the label as a string. Also change it to string. No, not a string, the label, and just destruct the field here. And this is pretty much it. This is all the things that we need to handle for our custom data picker component, which you can do other things, other custom things in this controller, and you have all the power here. But the thing that is bothering me here is that I need to use this self-closing tag here for my controller, not like this, and this is much better. And now if I head over to my user's component here, and below the checkbox, I simply pass the RHF date time picker custom component. Again, pass the schema here. For the name, I simply pass the registration date and time. And for the label, anything you want. For example, registration date and time. But now if you open up your browser here, you see that we have so much errors because we forgot to pass our adapter to our localization provider here. So for the localization provider or date adapter, I simply pass the adapter date FNS here, which I'm going to import it again manually. Import adapter date FNS from MUI X date pairs adapter v3. That's it. And now open your browser and you can see that we can simply select any date and time that we want, and the corresponding registration date and time will be filled here, and everything is working correctly. I simply select and time, and everything is handled for me. And that's it for our date and time controller. The next component is going to be this date range picker here. It's pretty much the same as date and time picker here that we just implemented. Just duplicate this RHF date time picker here like this. Change the name of it to RHF date range picker like this. For this component, I'm not going to use any label. Remove all the label here. Change the name of the component to RHF date range picker here. For the controller, I'm going to get the value and rest field from the render method here. The localization provider is the same as before. Instead of this component, I'm going to use date range picker here. I'm going to destruct the rest field here. And for the value, I'm going to simply pass this here, array.isArray value. Firstly, I'm going to check that if the value is an array, then return the value here. Otherwise, I'm going to return null and null. This is necessary for this component, for this controlled component to work correctly, and for the TypeScript and the runtime to not throw any errors. Then head over to your schema file here, and below registration date and time, just put former employment period, for example, or anything else. This is going to be, sorry, I have a typo here, former, and for the type, I'm going to return an array of dates here, which at maximum is going to be 2, because a range has a minimum and maximum for its values, and I can also put a mean of 2 here for better type safety for my form, like this. For the default values, I simply going to return an array with 2 dates, new date, and for the second one also I'm going to return the new date also. Then head over to the user's component here, and below it, for example, I simply put the typography of Material UI here. And then, for example, I put the former employment period, and I'm going to import the date range picker. I'm going to pass the schema here, and the name is going to be former employment period. You could also put this typography inside these RHF date range picker as a label, but I prefer to show all the possible scenarios, and you are free to handle anything related to your application freely. There is no strict ways of handling things. This is the results by now. As you can see, I can select a date range between start and end date. As you can see, everything is handled by React Hook form. The next component is going to be this range slider here. Just open the components again, and for example, again, copy the datetime picker here, change the name of the component to, for example, RHF slider, change the name of the component to RHF slider. The props are okay here. Everything is the same. Remove all of these localization providers here. Open an empty React fragment. For the label, I'm simply going to use a typography of Material UI. And for the slider, I simply use the slider component provided by Material UI. Simply I destruct the field here, and for example, I want to tweak a little bit of its properties. For example, I'm going to use value label display as auto to see the current value while the user is sliding the range. And for the schema itself, not this types folder here, inside the users, inside the types, inside the schema file, I simply add another field, for example, called salary range, which is going to be an array of numbers with the minimum of 2 and the maximum of, again, 2 values. And I simply initialize it as an empty array. And let me just close all of the components here. Then open your users component. And below the date range picker, just simply add your custom slider. Here, I have a typo here in the name of this component. Let me just hit F2 on the title of the function, then change it to RHF slider. And everything is correct. I'm gonna put the schema here and the name of field as salary range. And for the label, I'm going to put the salary range here. And now if you open your application here, you see that we have an error because by default, our salary range must have a minimum and maximum. But in default values, we forgot to put the, for example, min and max of our range here. For example, I put 0 and 2000 here. And if I refresh my page, we see that everything working as expected. For the last custom controller, we are going to create a simple controller for this switch element here. Just head over to your components folder. For example, duplicate this RHF slider that we just created and change the name to RHF Switch and change also the name of the component to RHF Switch. Just remove the render function here and just simply return a simple form control label here. For the control, just pass the switch element from the Material UI, destruct the field object here, and for the checked property, just return the field.value here. Also, don't forget to put the label here, and that's it for our custom RHF switch. And for the schema, just add a simple field called isTeacher, which is going to be of type z.boolean for now, but we are going to change it later in the tutorial for some other scenarios. Now for the default values, put the isTeacher, for example, as true, and go to your users component here below the slider, just add the RHF switch here, pass the schema here, and for the name add isTeacher. And for the label, just simply add "Are you a teacher?" And as you can see here, we simply have our switch component also here controlled. That is it for all of our custom controllers. But the thing that we can do here, and I just realized, is that we can also make our text field component here control. As you can see here, each time that I want to use the text field, I need to pass also the helper text and the error here. But I just realized that we can handle this duplication for all of our text fields in our project by simply adding another custom controller called RHF Text Field, which is pretty simple and you can also do it yourself. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to implement it together also. Just create another custom component called, for example, RHF Text Field.tsx here. Go to your switch, for example, and copy all of its content, then paste it in the RHF Text Field here. We do not need any label for this custom text field, and I'm also remove this label from here and change the name to RHF Text Field. And then remove all of these render function here. We need the field here, and also we are going to get the field state, the error from the field state, because we're going to show the user the error itself, and also we are going to make the component red or whatever if there's something wrong with the user's input. Inside the render function, we simply need to pass the text field from Material UI, and for the props, first I'm going to destruct the field here. For the error state, I'm going to simply pass the error like this, and for the helper text or the error text itself, I'm going to pass the error.message here. And that's pretty much it for our custom controller for our text field. And inside our application, the users component, I simply change this text field to RHF text field like this. Also, I'm going to change it to RHF text field. Simply I remove all of this here. I'm going to pass the schema as before. And for the name, I simply pass the name, which is also the name. And for this, I'm going to pass also the schema itself and the name, which is going to be email. I want to show you a simple trick, but it's powerful in this type of scenarios. Imagine that I want to pass the label property of the Material UI Text Field itself. For example, I want to change the width, for example, to full width. And also I want to pass the SX props, which is equal to style, and also much more related property of the Material UI Text Field. But as you know, we only defined the name as a props of this custom RHF text field here. To do that, I simply go to the RHF text field component here. And for the props itself, let me just change the interface to type here for better results. We do not need to change the previous prop field that we just defined earlier. I just need to add this type with another type like this. First, I'm going to use the type utility of TypeScript called pick here. What I'm going to pick is here that first I'm going to import the text field props, and I'm going to import it from Material UI here. Then here, for example, I can specify what properties of text field, of Material UI text field I want for this custom component to have. You can, for example, I can select the label here, and you can select the disabled property, the size of the text field. And as we can see, the IntelliSense is guiding us perfectly. But for the sake of this tutorial, I simply get the label for the text field component. And we can do this trick for almost all of the Material UI components. You can import the props of that component, whether it's a button, it's a text field, and much more. And here I need to pass and destruct the remaining props like this. And beside the field here, I simply pass the props like this. And as you can see here, if I head over to my users component, I can pass the label to name, and for the email field also to email perfectly. If you head over to your application here, you see that the error states and the helper text are handled automatically without us to pass the helper text and error fields anytime that we want to use a simple text field in our project. From now on in this tutorial, the next sections are going to be more practical in complex scenarios. If I head over to my completed project here, you see that we have a switch here called Are You a Teacher, which we have implemented it here, but it doesn't do anything special. It only changes this isTeacher value to true or false here, which is not an amazing thing to do. But here in the completed project, you can see if I change the Are You a Teacher switch to true, something else happens. Now I can add new student here. Also, if I click on this button again, I can add another field, and so much more. This case of scenario is pretty common in complex scenarios in enterprise applications where you have a dynamic list of fields that the user can add or remove to them, or it can be dynamic depending on the response that you get from your server. The amazing thing about this is that each of these dynamic fields that we just added here have their custom validation here, for example, like this. If I don't put more than 4 characters here, it throws me this error for this and not for this. Is pretty amazing. I can remove them. And for more complex scenarios, you can also add switch here to change the order of these dynamic fields here. The thing that I recommend you to do is that go ahead to the React hook form documentations, especially for the use field array hook here. And I just need you to take a brief look at this documentation here and read the headings and the code snippets, which is pretty much simple, but yet very powerful. And in my opinion, it is one of the most advanced features of React hook form, which will make the life of the developer pretty much easier. It's an amazing hook. Let me just again refresh the completed project page. The thing that we are going to implement is that if the switch is false, nothing will happen. If the switch is true, the new dynamic fields are going to be added to the schema. So we need to distinguish between the false state and true state of the switch here. If it is false, a new type of validation for our schema is going to be implemented, and if it is true, it's going to be changed. If it is false, we don't have dynamic fields. If it is true, we can add dynamic fields like this, and if one of them is not valid, then you see that I cannot submit my form and the React hook form doesn't allow me to do it. All of these criteria must be met. To create this type of effect in Zod and React hook form that we can dynamically change the fields of our schema here, we just need to learn a very simple yet powerful thing in TypeScript called unions and discriminative unions, which is very practical in many use cases. So let's learn it. Just head over to anywhere in your project. You don't need to do it. I just need to show you some things. Then we delete this file that we just created here. I'm going to create a file called test.ts here. We're going to remove it later. Imagine that we're creating a type for our products in our application. I'm going to create a type called product. Our product is going to have a name of type string and a price of type number here. And then I'm going to create, for example, a laptop from this product. For example, laptop XYZ is going to be of type product here. For the name, I'm going to pass the, for example, the XYZ itself. And for the price, I'm going to pass the 200. Also, I'm going to add another field, for example, called the screen size here, which is going to be of type number. Then I'm going to pass the screen size, for example, to 14 here. This is correct so far. Imagine that we are going to create another product called, for example, const AirPods Pro here, which is of type also the product here. The name is, for example, AirPods Pro 2020, AirPods Pro. The price is, for example, I don't know, 100. But the screen size here doesn't have any meaning for the AirPods Pro because it doesn't have any string. Let me just make it camel case here. So we need to distinguish between our laptop here and AirPods, which both of them are product. But laptop may have other fields that is not common with AirPods and vice versa. To overcome this issue in TypeScript, I just simply remove this screen size from the product itself and only mention the common fields that are shared between all products here. This is it. Above the type of product, I simply add another type, for example, called laptop here. The laptop is going to have a type which is going to be laptop, and the fields that are only unique to the laptops. For example, a laptop might have a screen size here, which is of type number, the graphics, also string, and much more. Also, we have another category, for example, in our shop called headphones, which it has a shared key like laptop called, for example, headphone here, and it has another custom field called, for example, active noise cancelling here, which is of type, for example, Boolean. It has ANC or not. And this is it for now. We call it discriminative union in TypeScript because the only thing is common between the type of laptop and type of headphone is this type field here. It can be anything. You can call it variant, product, type, and much more. But it must be something unique between each of these types here. Why do we need them? For your product type here, I'm going to put an AND operator here. Then I'm going to OR the laptop and headphone together. With this simple trick, I can now distinguish between a laptop and AirPods Pro for my product type here. What do I mean? Is that if I hit Control space here, and as you can see here, we have a new field called type, which is going to be get from here and here, which we added it to our product type here like this. My laptop is going to be of type laptop, which is obvious. And if I put laptop here, as you can see, if I hit on Control and a space here, we see that the fields only specific to the laptop. I can pass the graphics, for example, to NVIDIA, and also the screen size, for example, to 40. But for example, imagine that I use the headphone type for my product here. The TypeScript is throwing me this error that graphics and screen size is not present on the product in this situation with this discriminated type here. But if I change it to the laptop itself, you see that the TypeScript is satisfied itself. Now the TypeScript for the AirPods Pro is throwing me this error that you need firstly, you need to pass the type here. I know that my AirPods Pro is of type headphone here. And now if I hit on Control space here, you see that we have only see the ANC here, not screen size or graphics, only ANC, which is specific to headphones, which is, for example, true. With this simple concept here, we can handle the most complex scenarios in handling forms and dynamic fields and states, which is a must to know, which most of you may have known it for a while now. Now let me just remove this extra component that we just created. Now we need to bring this TypeScript concept into our Zod schema here. How to do it? We want to do something that is pretty common in complex scenarios. So what is it? Imagine that we are creating a new user with this information here. For example, with the name of James and with the age of 30. Depending on your server or backend, most commonly we call an API endpoint with this information as body here, as body of the request. And the new user will be created on our server. So for example, we call an endpoint like /API/create new user, and the method is just not important here. So keep that in mind that we create the user with this information by calling one of our backend API's endpoints. But what if we want to edit the user that we just created? In most cases, you need to identify for your backend that which user you want to make some edits on it. We need to distinguish between the users, between the user that we want. How to? We simply add another field, for example, like the ID of the user to our body of the request. For example, I want to change the James to Leo, the 30 to 20, but my backend needs to distinguish between the users, so I need to pass the ID of that user. So I send the new name, the new age, alongside with the ID of the user that I want to edit here. And for example, call another endpoint on my server here. This concept is pretty common in many scenarios where you have a single operation in your application, but with different dynamic schemas. Imagine that you have one schema that when you are creating the user has this schema here, and while you are editing that user, it has this schema with the added ID fields here. And you can extend this concept into new things. For example, when you're creating your user, you cannot specify, for example, the profile image for it, but when you are editing that user, you can simply add the profile image to the user. So you can also add, for example, the image profile field alongside with others and so much more. So let's implement this concept, this useful concept, into our Zod schema, which you can extend it to your needs. To do that, just open your schema.ts file and wrap all of the schema into another Zod utility called Zod.intersection, like this, and don't forget to remove this semicolon at the end, which is perfect. This is equal to this concept in TypeScript. For example, I have the type 1 equals to something and the type 2 is equal to something, and I want to create the intersection of these types, for example, to new type here, and I would use something like this, type 1 intersect with type 2 here. This is exactly the same. And now if I add another Z, for example, .object here, I can merge these two objects together. So let me just remove all of them. But as we talked before, we need the AND operator and also the OR operator. So imagine that I want to create a new type like this. Type, for example, type 1 is equal to something, type 2 is equal to something else, and type 3 something else. I want to create a new, for example, type 4, which will be equal to type 1 intersect with type 2 or type 3. Just remember the laptop and headphone example that we just talked about. We want to implement something like this with the Zod, which is pretty simple, yet very powerful. So we have the intersection part here. Just at the end of this object here, add a new comma, and we need to use another Zod utility called Zod.Discriminated union here like this. For the first argument of this utility function, I need to pass the thing that will be common between our dynamic schema fields. Remember the type field from the TypeScript version example of this, the laptop and headphone example. I want to call it the variant here like this, and it will make sense in a moment. Add comma here, and for the second argument, open the brackets here, and we need to pass two variation of our schema. What are they? For the first object, I'm going to use the variant as z.literal.create. What do I mean by create? It means that my current state of form is in creation mode. I'm creating a new user. And here, add another z.object here with the variant of z.literal edit here. What is this z.literal here? For example, imagine that I'm going to create a new const, for example, something which is equal to not something, for example, product type here, which will, for example, equal to laptop as const here, like this. This is exactly like this, so nothing very special. If we remember in our example that when we are in create creation variant, we don't need any extra field, but when we are in editing state, we need this ID field here. So in this variant, the create variant, we do not need any extra field, but when we are in edit mode, we need something. We need to simply add the ID of our schema like this, z.string with a minimum of 1. So with this way, we are sure that we are sending the correct data, the correct schema with the ID when we are sending the data to our server. And now for our default values, the TypeScript is throwing us this error that we need to also specify the variant of our form, which by start, we are in creation mode and I need to pass the variant create. But if I change it to, for example, edit here, you see that TypeScript is not happy here because if you are in edit mode, we need also to pass the ID. So if I hit Control space here, we see that the IntelliSense is guiding me through. And if I pass the ID, for example, to something, the error will be gone. But for the initial state of my form, I need to use the create state, not edit state. So that was the use of intersection and discriminated union in Zod, which is pretty powerful tool that you can use in complex scenarios in your application. By the help of the concept that we just implemented into our schema, we can also add these dynamic fields into our schema also and implement it into our application. So if I check the "Are you a teacher?" switch here, now I can add new fields and also I can remove them. All of these dynamic fields have their unique validation here like this. And as you can see, we have two states here for our schema. One, if the isTeacher here is false. Another state is that when the isTeacher is true. So let's implement it. We have another way to implement this concept with Zod, which has simpler syntax, but it might remove some of the useful features of Zod. But in this situation, it won't bother us at all. So let's learn that way of doing it also. To do that, at the end of your schema here, at the end of the z.intersection here, call and on it, open the parentheses here. Inside it, use z.union. Again, inside it, open the brackets and put the z.object that you want to use here. For example, let's just remove this isTeacher here and put it exactly here. isTeacher, I'm going to use z.literal false. And also another z.object when the isTeacher z.literal is true. And as you saw, if the isTeacher switch is true, I'm going to have dynamic students field. So I simply add a students, which is z.array here. Each array item will be simply another Zod object, and each student is going to have simple name with the minimum characters of 4, for example. And as you can see here, the TypeScript is throwing us the error that when the isTeacher field is true, we also need to have the students field, which by start will be going an empty array. And if I change it to false, you see that TypeScript is not happy and is telling me that I must remove these students here because when the isTeacher switch is false, we have nothing. When it is true, we have the students array here. So by default, I'm gonna use the isTeacher to false. Perfect. Now let's just implement this schema in our application. Just head over to your user's component, and to implement this kind of behavior where we have dynamic fields that we can add or remove, we can use one of the most powerful tools of React hook form library, which is the use field array hook, which is perfect for these kinds of scenarios. To use it, do like this, const destruct the object and use the use field array hook from React hook form. And inside the options here, the first thing that we need to pass is the control itself, which we'll get from the use form hook here. In this case, use form context, control, and we must pass it here like this, control, or with simpler syntax like this. And also we need to tell the React hook form that which field we need to take the control of it. So we need to pass also another option here, the name option. And for this value, as you can see here, we have a students by default from the IntelliSense. Why only a students is recommended here? If you head over to our schema here, we see that the only array of this schema, this is a string, an array of a string, an array of a string also this is array, but the only array that it has another object inside it as a schema is this students field here, which is exactly what we want as a type for this hook to work. The React hook form type system is very smart enough so it can recommend me the correct field that I can use for the name here. Perfect. Now from the destructured object, I can get many useful utility functions here and methods like append, fields, insert, move, prepend, remove, replace, swap, and update here, which the names are pretty self-explanatory. Append adds a new item to the end of the list. With fields, you can get the array itself and map over them to show the corresponding inputs. With insert, you can pass a new element at a specific location, at a specific index. With move, you can move an element up or down. The array prepend adds to the start of list. Remove adds, deletes an element from the array at a specific index. Replace the whole array. Swap and update are also explanatory. With update, you can pass the index that you want to change and also the new element that you want to change with. For a starter, we are going to use only the append method for now. Just let me hide the browser here like this. And the thing that we also need is let me just open the schema here. We need to have access to this isTeacher switch. So we want to know when show the user, just bring it back, show the user. Let me just refresh the page. We want to know when to show the user this button, for example, here, which user can add or remove fields. So I need to have access to this switch here, which is here. And in React hook form, I can simply access it like this. Const is teacher, for example, I call it isTeacher because in our schema, we called it isTeacher. isTeacher is equal to use watch from React hook form. As always, we need to pass the control here. And for the name, I'm going to use the isTeacher also. Now head over to your end of the component here and below the switch here, which is isTeacher field here, put the isTeacher here. And if isTeacher is true, we are going to render our button here like this. For the text, add new student here. On click, we want to add a new student into our field array. So what we are going to use is the append that we get from here. We're going to use the append. And what we are going to append here, a simple object with an empty name, which is the name of the student, and it can be anything else. And for the type of this component, I'm going to use button instead of submit. If you don't do it, if you click on this button, the React will submit our form instead of doing the unclick here. Perfect. Now we also need to map over our field array here. So we need to get another thing from this use field array called fields here, and down here I'm going to map over the fields here, fields dot map, and for each field, and also I'm going to get the index of each field. I'm going to return a simple text field, sorry, not text field, the RHF text field that we just created. For the name, I'm going to pass this string here. We need to give it the address of our field inside our schema. So let me just open the schema side by side here. So we need to pass this name here inside this name here. So we need to address it here. Where is it? It's inside the students. And because this is an array and we need to have the index of the name that we want here. So how to pass it? It's pretty simple. Students dot this index here that we get for each iteration and pass the index here and dot the name of the field that we want, which is here is the name also. Dot name here, which is perfect for our name here. Just close it here. For the label, I'm going to simply pass the, for example, name, and also don't forget to pass the key with the value of fields.id here. This ID will be auto-generated for us when we are using the fields from our useField array, which is perfect. And for each iteration, I'll also want to add a remove button. So simply need to pass this RHF text field inside a React fragment here. Just put it here and copy the key here in the fragment. Perfect. And below our text field, I need to pass the button itself. Button, not button base, button with the text of remove, with the color of error or red. For the onClick, I'm going to pass the remove, the index that we want here. We also need to get the remove from useField array here. Remove, go again here. Perfect. And for the type also, as before, I need to pass the button here instead of submit. Also, another thing that I think it's better practice to do is that I want when the isTeacher switch is toggled off or false, I simply need to empty the students array, which is the correct behavior. So below here, I'm going to add another use effect and empty dependency for now. And I need to check if the isTeacher is false or is not active. I simply replace my whole field array with an empty array. So I also need to get the replace from useField array, which is perfect. And also I need to simply unregister my students array from the React hook form. If you don't do it and check the form value, after the replace is done, we have something like this inside our form data. The students will equal to undefined, which is not that we want. We also do not want to see the students at all when the switch is false inside our form logic, which is also another good practice. And it's not necessary to do this unregister part, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to put it here. And also I need to get the unregister from our useForm context here like this. And for the dependencies here, I simply use the quick fix here and pass isTeacher, replace, and unregister here. Perfect. And now if you head over to our application and refresh the page itself, if I change it to true, this switch, the button is here because we specified that if the isTeacher is true, I'm going to see a new button with the text of add new student here. If I click on it, you see that a new field here is added to my fields here, which we're going to have the validation that we specified inside our schema here. We specified that at least the name of the student must be at least 4 characters, which is exactly that we have here. Perfect. I can add new students here like this. Each of them will going to have their specific validation, and I can also remove them one by one, and I can also again make the switch false. Let me just add a few fake students here. And if I check the console log here, you see that for the students field, we have exactly the fields here. And if I make the switch false, you see that there is no students inside our form here, the form values here, which is exactly the behavior that we want here, which is perfect for our dynamic field array here. Perfect. Now that we have implemented our whole fields for our application, now also we need to have the submit button, for example, a reset form button like this, the editing capabilities, and totally the CRUD capabilities of our simple project. So let's get started. Open your users component, and at the end of your function here, but before do anything extra here, first I simply wrap all of my application inside a MUI container like this and copy all of these here and paste it here. For the max width of my container, I'm going to use SM. Also for the component, I simply use the form, HTML form here. So all of these container will be considered as a form HTML element, and that's it for now. And now if I check the application here, you see that there is a nice padding between the edge of the browser and my application content itself. Just for now, consider using it. Now again, head over to the end of your application here, and here above the last stack here, we need to add another stack for the containers. For the container for our buttons, for the direction, I'm going to use flex direction of row. I need to justify the content space between, so the buttons are separated by each other. Inside this stack, I simply need to pass 2 buttons, one for creating new user for now with the type of submit here, submit, and another button just for resetting our form, just to show you the capabilities of React Hook Form library. On click, I simply need to pass a simple handle, for example, reset function here, and at the top of our component here, I simply define it. It's pretty simple, just create a simple handle function, which is equal to reset with the default values that we defined it inside our schema here. So whenever the user clicks on the reset button, just let me bring it from the use from hook here, reset like this. And whenever the user clicks on the reset button, the form values will be reset to these values, these default values that we defined in our application. This is one of another use cases of the default values for our form. So now if you check our application here like this, if I put something here in my field, select anything that I want, and if I hit on reset button here, you see that the form state is the initial state of my form. And if I click on new user, nothing will be happening because we haven't implemented this new user button here. So by implementing it in the next section of video, we can mutate our database, our server, and add a new user on it. So let's get started. Now, the thing that is needed here is that when the user clicks on this new user button, it submits our form data to our fake backend here, which is running on our local port. To implement the new user button functionalities, just close everything here, then open your file explorer and go to the services folder, then the mutations.ts file here, open it. Just for your information, it doesn't matter how you handle your form submissions and your communications with your backend server. It doesn't matter at all for the sake of this tutorial. I'm just showing you one of the ways that you can post your data to the server and API endpoints. It doesn't matter how you handle it. And in this tutorial, we're going to do it with React Query. We're going to do our mutations with React Query, which is very powerful, very easy to use and maintain. To create a mutation with React Query, we do something like this. I'm going to export a function, a hook called useCreateUser. Inside this hook, I'm going to return another hook called useMutation, and I'm going to import it from TanStack React Query here, like this. Inside it, as a mutation options, I simply need to pass a mutation function which is responsible for communicating with the server. It's going to be of type an asynchronous function. This async function is going to get some data, which is of type our schema, which we defined earlier in the tutorial here. And for the function itself, we simply need to create a simple axios.post. Let me just import the axios here, axios.post to the endpoint of our API, which is HTTP localhost on our 8080 port at the route of users with the data here, which we are going to pass to this mutation function in a moment. When the mutation function is done, I remind you again that all of these are related to React Query and it's not React Hook Form specific. When this mutation function is done or resolved, on the onSuccess event of this use mutation hook here, I'm going to do something. I'm going to pass an async function. After that, our user is created. Then we need to update the list of the users in our application, which technically this process is called invalidation. It's pretty simple with the help of React Query. So below the useCreateUser hook here, I need to create a cons here called query client, which will be going to be the query client itself. And on our onSuccess method here, I simply need to await query client.invalidate queries, and I want to invalidate one of my queries by providing its key. So what should I pass here as the key? It must be an array. What is it gonna be? I simply go to my queries file here, then search for the query which is responsible for fetching the users itself, which I didn't implement it yet. So let us implement it here in my queries.ts file here. At the end of the file, I'm going to export another simple query hook like this, use users, which this will going to return a list of users. Return use query here. For the query key, I'm going to pass the users key. For the query function also, I'm going to pass a function like this, axios.get. And for the endpoint itself, I simply pass the HTTP localhost on the port of 8080 and the endpoint of users here. By now, this query function will return the list of the users, but it's not pretty functional in TypeScript because we don't have any IntelliSense here. To get around this, I simply need to provide the return of this function with types. So this function will be of type promise, and it will be going to return a list of options like this. Then I simply need to get the response of my query function. Then I simply need to map over the data, but also the return of this axios.get method here is not obvious for TypeScript here. So we need to pass another type here as a generic. Imagine that this endpoint returns the list of users with another shape, and your application will going to consume the result of this API call with another shape. So we need to convert our API response to a shape or type that it can be consumable for our front-end application, which is pretty common in communicating between client side and backend side of any project. So this endpoint will return the list of users here. And if I head over to my fake backend here and go to the db.json file here, if I go down here, for the sake of this tutorial, I have created a few users here for you to see the shape of each user in our database. So by now, I know that my fake backend, my mock backend will return the shape of the user like this. I simply need to make it a type in my application for each user that my backend will return. For better organization of our code, I create another file type in my types folder called API types here.ts. If you remember, we talked about the discriminated unions in TypeScript, and my application needs to create and edit the created user by our client. So our API types will going to have a type, for example, create, and the type of edit here, which the variant will be edit. And on the edit variation of our API post call, I also need to pass the ID here, because when we are creating, there's no need to provide the ID of the user itself because the backend will generate it automatically. But when we are editing a user or an entity on our server, we always need to pass the ID of the desired user. Some of the fields are common between the create and edit phase of our API call. In a few moments, you will understand why are these going to be very useful in the future. I will create another type called, for example, type common here, and I simply pass the shape of the user that the backend will return. We have email field, name, states, gender, language spoken, which are exactly the fields that exist on my database here. So by now, I know that my user returning from the server will going to have these fields, and depending on the situation that I'm creating or editing the user, I'm going to pass the ID or not pass it depending on the situation. So I need to export it for now, for the future. And below here, I simply need to export another type called API create edit, which will be going the intersection of common with the unions of create and edit here, create or edit here. And also the get user API call type will be going to this edit here, and the common type here like this. These types that we implemented here are pretty useful if you want to maintain your application and extend the scale of your application very easily. And these scenarios will happen so much in real world cases. For example, first you need to create the shape of the response of your backend. For example, the put request, the post request, the get request, all of it are gonna be handled by you for better type safety and better maintainability. So now the thing that I want from this file here for now is this API get here. So if I head over to my queries.ts file again, I can simply pass the API get here as a generic like this, and I'm going to import it. Then it's going to be a list of API get or a list of users here. Then I can simply easily, let me just remove this map here. I can simply map over the response returning from this API call, and I simply call each iteration user. And for each iteration, I simply hit Control space here, which the IntelliSense is not working. I don't know why. I need to return a list of option here, which will going to have ID and a label. And I'm going to use this users query to show our client the list of users to manage it, to manage them. ID is going to be user.id, and the label also is going to be user.name. But I realized that I can pass anything here and the type safety is not working. In these situations, you need to simply force TypeScript to guess the types and help you in the future. So I'm going to use satisfies option here. And if I, for example, put another field which is not exist on the option type, it's gonna return us an error. And if I, for example, don't provide the required field, it's also gonna return me the error. We can also use the as here, but I most of the time prefer satisfies in most situations. Now that I implemented this use queries hook here, I can simply use it in my application. So I simply head over to the users component here. Then I'm going to initialize the created query earlier, const users query use users here. Now I need to render the users query data in my application. So exactly below the container of our form, I simply create a list for this subheader. Let me just import it from Material UI. For the subheader of this, I simply put the list subheader with the name of the users. Inside the list itself, I'm going to map over the useQuery.data.map. For each iteration, I simply return a list item with the key of user.id, and I simply disable the padding of my list for better appearance. Then inside each list item, I simply return a list item button. So when the user clicks on each item of my list, it will gonna do something in the future. Open it here, and on click of it, just put the handle user click handler here. Let me just make it uppercase. Then for each iteration, I simply pass the user.id here, but I have not implemented this handle user click here, so let me just implement it here. The thing that this function is gonna do is that do something so that my application knows that this user is clicked. So at the top of my component here, I simply create a constant called ID, and I'm going to use the useWatch hook from RHF. I'm going to pass the control, and also the name will be going to be ID. This constant will be the ID which is presented on my form object. Why do I need this? Is that I simply will be going to pass this to my user query, which I did not implement it yet. It's not users query, it's user query. It will be going the complete user returning by our server, not the list of it. So I simply pass the the use user here, and for the argument of it, I simply pass the ID here. So let's go and implement this query also in the queries.ts file here. Below the file here, just export another query hook called use user, which will going to return a user from the server. It's gonna get the ID of the user that we want, and we simply return a use query. As before, query key will be going to be, for example, the user as a main key and also the ID as a dynamic key. For the query function, I simply pass an async function. This function will be of type promise and returning the schema of our user, which we defined it earlier in our application. So I simply create a res constant, which will going to be the response of our API call to the server, await axios.get API get. As a result of this query, it's not an array of API get, it's only an API get because we are going to get only a user, not a list of users. And for the endpoint here, I simply put two backticks here, HTTP localhost 8080 users, and I simply pass the ID here for the argument of my API. This is how the JSON server backend works in Node.js. But it might be different with your case. And instead of doing like this, I simply destruct the result and simply return the data from it. Then I simply need to return an object with the shape of my schema. As you can see, the IntelliSense is working because we provided the result of our API call function. So inside our return here, for the variant, I simply pass the edit. So my application now knows that we are in editing mode. And when the variant is on edit here, I can simply pass the ID, which will be going to be the data.id here. But for example, if I put it as create, you see that the ID is not available when the variant is create, which we discussed thoroughly earlier before. Edit here. For the name, I simply pass the res.name, the data.name. Email will be going to be data.email. Former employment period will be going to be new date, data.former employment period for the first index of this array here. And for the second also, I simply pass the new date, data.former employment with the index of 1. For the gender, I simply pass the rest of gender. Pretty straightforward. Languages spoken will be going to be languages spoken. Registration date and time will be new date. Data.registration date and time. Salary range will be going to be data.salary range. First index and the second index salary range. Also, skills are gonna be the data.skills. States, data.states here. Students, data.students. Is teacher also gonna be data.isTeacher here. Sorry, there's a typo here. Put it states here. As you can see here that everything is working just fine. The TypeScript is very happy. And by now I have created a user hook that it will return the desired user by providing the ID of the user that I want here. So let's use this user hook in our application. Let me just import this user hook here. And also we're going to pass the ID available on our ID form field to this user query, but we never change the ID on our form to the desired ID. So if you remember, we put the handle user click whenever our user clicks on each list item in our form. So wherever you want in the application, create this function const handle user click here, which is going to pass the ID and of type string, and we're going to set the value. Let me just get it from our form here. Set value from our use form hook here. This utility will change any of your form fields to whatever you want. So I need to change the ID field of my form to the passing ID to the handle user click handler function. So head over down here. Perfect. And I want to make this button selected on a certain condition. So I'm going to pass the selected when the ID of my form, the ID here, when it's equal to the user.id here. And for the text of each list item, I simply pass the list item text here with the label of user user.label here. And now if we head over to our application here, we see that we have the list of the user. You might not see them because your backend server is empty, but we're gonna create some other users in a few moments. Let me just make this app a little bit more beautiful. So put all of the things inside the main container of your application inside a stack. Select all the things here except the ending container here. Put it inside this stack here. For the direction of this stack, I simply put the flex direction of row. And for the gap, I simply pass the 2. As you can see here, the list of users is left and our form is on the right. And you can see that whenever I click on one of these list items here, nothing happens, but as you can see, it will be going to be selected because this ID is now equal to user.id. So if I now like this ID here, for example, below the list here, for example, I simply pass the ID here. You see that whenever I click on each list item, you see that the ID of that user is now saved on the ID constant here, and this ID is also the ID presenting on my form field. Now that we have this ID, by clicking on one of the list items here, I can simply get the corresponding user entity from the server and populate my entire form with the fetched data. So let's implement this behavior also. But I forgot something to do in the queries.ts file here. We have provided the query key, the query function. Also, exactly after the query function method here, I simply pass the enabled to this here. This will only call this query function here whenever the ID is not a false value. For example, if I not provide this query function might run even when the ID is not provided, and it might cause some problems in our application. So whenever the ID is provided, whenever I'm sure that we have valid ID and not false ID here, I can simply call this endpoint to fetch the user with the corresponding ID here. It's React query specific, not React hook form specific. Let me just close this. To populate the form with the user query data fetched from server, we simply need to create another use effect here. Whenever you want, use effect. And for dependency, don't pass anything for now. And if the user query.data is defined, I just want to simply reset my form with the user query.data here. And I use ESLint to provide the dependencies for the use effect dependencies array. Now, if I refresh my page, and for example, if I click on David, you see that my form is perfectly populated with the David data fetched from the server. If I click on Robert, you see that the values are fetched from the server. If I click, for example, on John, you see that everything is working perfectly. If I hit on reset, you see that the David is now not selected, and all of the fields have been reset to their initial state. And again, if I click on Robert, John, and anything else, you see that everything is working perfectly. And now it's the time to make this new user button to work. We just need to head over to the mutations.ts file, and we are going to complete this use create user hook here that we were just creating it. If you recall, we provided the mutation function here, and on success, we were needed to provide the query key of our users list on our invalidated queries function here. So if I head over to our queries here, and if I go to the use users, you see that the query key is users here, as I simply pass the users here. And whenever a new user is created, the query with the users key, which is corresponding to this query here, will be invalidated, and also this list is going to be refetched from the server. And for the sake of this tutorial, I'm simply put an alert, for example, call the user created, like this. Now, if I head over to the users.tsx file here, I simply need to do something when the form is submitted to the server. So on our form component here, I simply, on the onSubmit event, I simply pass the handle submit here, which is not defined as simply, we can get it from our useForm hook here, like this. It will do anything related to checking the form validations before submitting. It prevents the page to reload and many other useful features. And also, whenever we submit our form, it will pass the current data on our form to the function that we provide here in the handle submit argument. I simply need to pass a onSubmit function here, which I will create it here, const onSubmit. For the argument, I'm going to use the submit handler type on the React hook form and pass the schema of my form as a generic here is equal to this function data here. I simply do something when the handle submit function is called. And now, for example, I want to do something depending on the situation. If variant is equal to create or edit, which the variant is not defined yet. So for example, here I simply define it here, const variant of my form. We'll be going to pass the control here and also get the variant from the form. And also here for the onSubmit function, if the variant is create, then we know that we are creating a new user. Else we know that the variant is, for example, of type edit here. But for the simplicity, I simply pass the else clause here because we know that by now the variant is of type edit. So I can edit the user here, the user. And if the variant is create, I can create my user. We defined our create user mutation earlier, so I simply need to initialize it, create a user mutation. We're going to be create user here. And whenever we submit our form with the variation of create, I simply call the user mutation dot mutate like this. And also I simply pass the data to my create user mutation here, and we need to test whether it works or not. So if I refresh my application, for example, put something here. If you check it now, you see that if I click on new user, nothing works and the form won't be submitted. It's only because of this handle submit function, which we get it from our use form here, which is pretty useful in the React hook form. I pass an email here, fake state, gender. And if I click on new user, you see that nothing is working. What is the problem here? The problem was because of a typo here, the mutations.ts file here. Instead of localhost, I provided localhost without the L here. And now if we test our application here, let me just refresh the page. You see that I created this user just now. Let me just revert it to the previous state, and now everything is reverted to its initial. And if I, for example, put test here, I accidentally clicked on John here. Let me just refresh the page again. test.com, for example. For states, I simply select all of them. Mail, I'm gonna tick all of it. Where I must contain at most 2 elements because of my validation here, and for this also. And I simply click on the new user here. And as we can see here, the user has been created, and also the user's list has been invalidated because of this line here. So when we create our user and this mutation function on create user hook is done, this onSuccess will run and will invalidate the user's query like this. So if I create another user with the name of test2, for example, and click on test2, if I OK on the alert here, which is the success alert, you see that the test2 here, for example, I can switch between all of these data here, which is perfect. You have done something very amazing here. It's working pretty amazing. We can simply switch between the created users. The form will be populated with the fetch data from this server. And now the only thing that is remaining is that we need to somehow also edit the users from the list. For example, if I click on Robert and change the Robert to, for example, Max, and click on, for example, an edit user button here, the user will be updated on the server. To implement the editing capabilities, we just need to simply go to the mutations script again, because we're going to script something on the server. We're going to create another hook called use edit user here, like this. Return use mutation here. For the mutation function, just pass the async data, which is of type else schema, and simply pass the data to the put method of Axios on the endpoint of http local host 8080 users, and with the ID of data.id, which is not presented on our data, but if you recall, we have the ID on our form, but because of this variant field that we just defined earlier, we don't access to this ID on the data object. To work around this, simply put the if data.variant is equal to edit, like this, and wrap this await.axios.put here in our if statement. Here you see that the TypeScript error is gone, which is perfect for now. And for the data also, we need to pass the data to update our user. For better organization and maintainability, instead of passing the object like this, for example, the server accepts ID, which is going to be of type ID, data.id, the name is going to be name. For example, the name, and also on some fields, we need to map and convert the shapes of our form data into the server data, and it's too tedious to pass all of them here, and it's not very readable. For these scenarios, just let me remove the data argument of Axios here, and inside the src folder in the users feature, let me just close all of the things. In the utils here, just create a file called, for example, map data.ts, which is responsible for converting the user form data into the accepting shape of our server or any other server, it doesn't matter, but this scenario is pretty common. So from this file, we simply export a function called map data, which will get the data with the type of our form schema, and this will going to return this type that we defined earlier, API create edit type here. If you recall, it's going to be the shape accepted by the backend of our backend. So we simply want this function to be responsible for both converting the form data on both create and edit variations, which is pretty doable by using the TypeScript capabilities. So there is, if you recall, and if I open the API types file here, if you recall that there were so many common fields between the create and edit variation of our form submitting. In other scenarios, it might be much different, but in our situation, just for learning purposes, the only field that is not common between the creation and edit is this simple id.string id field here, but it's very important. And if you recall, we have exported this common type from this file here. So inside our map data function here, I simply create a common constant, common of the type common. Just let me just rename this common to, for example, API common for better readability of the code. And now I simply map the data of my form to the API common shape. I just copied and paste the common constant here for the speed of the tutorial. And also I simply put a switch case a statement here, data variant here. And in the case that if data.variant is create, I'm gonna return the common constant itself and also the variant of data.variant. And then on edit variant, I simply return the common itself, also the ID itself, data.id of my form, and with the variant of data.variant here, and perfect for now. This is our mapper function, which is pretty useful. So if I head over to the application, before we continue to finish the use edit user hook here, I just go to the use create user that we just created before, and I simply import the map data and pass the data to this function, which is not be needed in this case, but it might be needed in real world case scenarios. And also, if you recall that this mapper function will also return another extra variant field here. We only needed this variant field for demonstration, for better type safety and better maintainability of our code. But when we are submitting the form to the server, we don't need that variant and it might cause many problems. So we need to somehow remove the variant field from this map data. It's pretty simple. I just need to get the omit utility function from the Lodash. Let me just import it like this, omit from Lodash, omit. And like this, I can simply put the object and also the field that I want to remove it from the object itself, like this. And I just need to also copy this from here and paste it in the data argument of Axios.put here. And after that, the user has been edited. I simply alert the user that user edited successfully, for example. And on success, here, I simply put another async function. These are all React query related. The first argument of onSuccess method is the data returned on the mutation function. And also the second one, which for example, I call it variables here, is exactly the thing that we provided as an argument to our mutation function. Why do I need this? For cache invalidation in React query. When the user has been edited, first of all, I need to invalidate the list of users because the name of the user might have been changed when the user is edited. So the users list also might be changed also. So first of all, I need to invalidate the user's keys. So first I need to initialize the query client by query client like this. Query client dot invalidate queries. The query key will be going to be users here. Why do I need these variables? Because of this. If variables dot variant is equal to edit, I'm gonna invalidate query client dot invalidate queries. Query key will be user and the ID will be variables dot ID here. Where did this come from? If you head over to our queries here, we see that for our user, we simply pass the user as the head key and also the ID. So whenever one of these changes, the query key, the query itself will be refreshed from the server. So we need to somehow tell the query client that invalidate the list of users and also the single user that we have been edited like this. So perfect. Now we need to use this use edit user hook in our application. So we need to head over to our users component here. And instead of passing the new user for the submitting button form, I make it conditionally. So if the variant of my form is on create, I simply return the new user like this. Else, I know that the variant is on edit mode, so I return the edit user here. And let me just make this button of type contain for you to see better. And now if we head over to our application, for example, I click on Robert here. And if I, for example, uncheck this and change Robert, for example, to Max, and if I hit on edit user, we see that something is wrong with our application. So let me just check it out. The problem was that we forgot to implement the else clause of our onSubmit function, which is pretty simple. We just need to initialize the edit user mutation like this, use edit user from our mutations file. And I simply use the mutate method on edit user mutation, and I'm gonna pass the data itself. Now, if I refresh my application here and for example, click on Robert, change it to Max here and click on edit. In these situations that we see that our form is not working correctly, we simply need to know why it's not submitting our data to the server? Because I know that when I click on edit user, the edit user mutation must be called, and when the user is created, it must show me an alert. But by now I know that even this function won't be run because this handle submit here does not allow the onSubmit function to be run. Why? Because there might be something wrong with the validation on my form, but maybe I don't see it on my form here. Because to solve that, for example, I need to parse the form value on the Zod schema. It's pretty simple yet very powerful in these situations. So I simply create a test button here. I'm going to call it parse here. On click, I simply pass a function which is going to be a schema. This is the schema that we just defined earlier. Schema.parse method on it with the current value of our form, get values, which we are going to get this from our use form context here, like this, get values here. Now, if I click on the parse button and open the browser console, you see that the Zod is throwing me this error that for the ID field, we expected a string but received a number. And if we head over to our backend server here, we see that the ID of each user is saved on the database, on the fake database, as a number, but we defined the ID returning from the database as a string, which is causing us this validation error, which is one of the amazing features of Zod, which will prevent these types of mistakes in our application. So now that I changed the string to number here, we see that other files are throwing me the error. If I head over to the queries, we see that the ID, this line has an error. It says that the type number is not assignable to type string. So we must convert this right side of the equation from number to a string. We have another error here. What is this? So also we need to change the right side to a string also, a string like this. And also here, just change the ID to a string also and remove this satisfies option here because we don't need it. And now if I refresh my page, if I click on Robert, and finally, if I change the Robert to Max, and if I click on edit here, you see that the Robert has been changed to Max. For example, I can also change the email to Max and click on enter. You see that the accessibility is correct also, and everything is correct. If the form is not valid, and if I click on edit, you see that the field has been focused automatically. So we need to solve the validation here. For example, I can remove these here and click on the edit user, and if I refresh the page, we see that the Max has been edited successfully. I also check the salary, for example, the slider here. We see that everything has been worked perfectly. If I refresh again, we see that the slider is on the previous state. So this is the end of the tutorial itself. We have learned almost anything related to React Hook Form and also its combination with Material UI library and also the Zod validation library. And you can use your knowledge now in the real world applications because you know all the basic and advanced things related to this famous stack for managing the forms in client-side front-end applications. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment below if you have any question related to this tutorial here.